Billings City Council, so it's a little more informal, our discussion. We don't make binding decisions except to perhaps give direction to staff. So you won't see votes, some of those niceties of a regular formal business meeting. The opportunity is just to get information and exchange information. There is a copy of our agenda on the back there for anybody who doesn't have one. That we've got 5 items on our agenda tonight. We will dig in here in just a minute. The first thing up, though, is an opportunity for public comment on anything that is on our agenda. Don't feel like you have to comment if it's on our agenda that you're interested in. You can wait until that item comes up, and there'll be another opportunity for public comment. But if you've got to leave and you wanted to comment on the last item on our agenda or anything like that and don't want to have to wait for what might be a couple hours, this is your opportunity, or even things that are not on our agenda. Would anybody like to comment on anything at this point before we get into our first item, which is the community impact of legalized marijuana? Any public comment on any item? Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. It's going to take a couple minutes of your time. Some of you have we've met already. My name is Iowa Young. Last name is spelled Y-O-U-N-G. And I'm supposed to do my address, right?
Sure.
2238 Larchwood Lane. I'm in Ward 4. So I'm here tonight because I'm representing the Yes for Safe Schools Billings Levy Campaign Committee. We're a grassroots campaign. We're comprised of members of the Billings Public Schools Parent Safety Advisory Committee. That's a new thing this year. And other community members who are passionate about ensuring that children have a safe environment in which to learn. So we've been meeting with people and organizations across town to share the levy details, and you've probably heard this message at least once. I know that community safety is a priority for you all, and I've spoken with you either directly or via email. So last November, the district hired a national they hired a company, Secure Environment Consultants, to conduct a comprehensive safety audit. They inspected each school and building in the district and interviewed key personnel. They found 58 common deficiencies across the district, which included physical infrastructure, as well as the need to upgrade technology associated with safety, security, and communication. Prevention and intervention resources in the form of nurses, counselors, mental health specialists, school resource officers, SROs, gang and dropout specialists are also identified as lacking based on the school population. Specifically, the district's lacking in camera systems, intercom systems, visual indicators of emergency outside the building, lockdown buttons, automated electronic defibrillators, and SROs, nurses, mental health counselors. I found the results shocking. I had to stop a couple times when I was reading it. I expected deficiencies, but not to that level. The equipment was so aged that it didn't always work, and it left children, students, and teachers in a vulnerable situation. The intercom systems used to notify students and teachers of an emergency, like a lockdown, doesn't always work. In one school, they work in half the building. So don't be in that other half of the building if there's an emergency. Prevention by supporting kids with mental health issues is a key factor in ensuring that safe environment in the school. And the audit found Billings Public Schools lacking in sufficient staff. Is that my timer?
No, but it's about to go off, but go ahead and wrap up.
Oh my gosh, I got to go. So anyway, $2.5 million for both the high school and the elementary levy. So $5 a month. If you have a home, that's worth $300,000. And the levies are perpetual, but the school board can adjust them in the future. There's a transparency committee that will be forming next fall. If you are interested in participating in that, this will be a group that will report back to the community how the funds are being used. And there is a form, an application, nomination, self-nomination on the school website. So I just thank you for supporting the levy, and it's important to our schools and our community. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Other public comment? Please come forward. Otherwise, we'll have an opportunity to comment on each of the items later. Any other public comment at this point? Okay, we'll close this comment period and move ahead to our first item on the agenda, which is the community impact of legalized marijuana. Melanie, I think you're going to introduce our presenter.
I am. Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're here tonight with Ben Court. And if you remember 2 years ago when you guys had the decision in front of you about whether to legalize marijuana for the city, this was our expert that we had brought in. We thought it was important to bring him back 2 years later to kind of see what's transpired, how's it going, and maybe some things we should look at differently. He was brought today courtesy of the Mental Health Center and Substance Abuse Connect, the Montana Alliance for Prevention, and Upstream Strategy Partners, which is my new company. So with that, I'm going to let him do his kind of bio for you, but we're just really excited to have him back, and he has a lot of great information. So with that, I'll introduce Ben Court.
Ben, and I misspoke. I should have said community impact of legalized THC. I've learned at least that much, but go ahead, you can explain what that's about.
Cool. The distinction's important. Hey, again, it's nice to see so many folks from last time. Good to be back. I've actually been here several times since, from the first visits that I made here. I've since gone on to do a lot of work with the Crow Nation, which has been a really exciting thing for us. We built a scholarship fund for education and master's degrees for folks to pursue it and then to come back on the res and teach. We also are at the very end stages of rebuilding their youth camp as a substance-free kind of haven inside of that world. I'll certainly give you a couple of things to think about, but more than anything, I'd like to be able to ask or answer questions if there are any. If I don't have answers, I'll do my very best to direct towards sources of that information. To begin with, I'll take my hint from you, Mayor Cole, with the THC piece. We've long known that this conversation is much more around the use of THC, the psychoactive component in the cannabis plant, rather than cannabis as a whole. And we've had a pretty good idea of a lot of things that THC does inside of the human brain and body. However, we now have a much better idea of what's taking place inside the human brain and body. And there's an interesting thing that I've found that sort of happens in public conversation. It takes a long time from information to go from scientific suspect to validated to public consumption and public understanding of. Because most people aren't reading white papers and journals and things like this. It falls down to people to try and explain it to the general public. And one of the things that we can say with very sound assurity right now is that this high potency THC, and the language that we use for high potency is anything 16% or higher is sort of where that's at right now. It has been determined to be causal, irrefutably causal, when it comes to causing anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, and psychosis. So psychosis as a whole being a bit of a generic term for all things mental health. For a long time, there was this chicken and egg question. Do more people consume because they have mental illness? Do more people have mental illness because they consume? And I don't know what it was in years past, but we do know that the changing nature of the high potency THC has made it to be determinable that it is causal for quite a few of these. The biggest exposure that we have with them, and Colorado is kind of your test case for this, but a lot of the other states who have and who keep these data can share them with you. One of the biggest issues that you see with this is increase in suicide rates. Now this we cannot say is causal, absolutely not. But you can say increased mental illness and increased intoxication typically does lead to higher suicide rates. So whether or not, where this belongs in the conversation, I'd like to give you some food for thought with it. In the last 4 years have been the highest ever youth recorded suicide rates that the state of Colorado has seen. That's mimicked in California as well. So one of the things that we are strongly encouraging everybody we can to consider is prevention on that subject. If you're not familiar with it, there's a thing called an ACE score, which is a adverse childhood event. Some of you clearly are, which I really appreciate, because maybe a little bit oversimplified, but based on somebody's ACE score, you can, at a population health level, certainly not the individual. I mean, my ACE score says I absolutely should not be here today, but at a population health level, the higher the ACE score, the harder the life, the shorter the life as well. And we've now got two really great sources of data, two sound information published from universities and journal published and peer-reviewed sources that show us that the more consumption there is in a home of THC by parents, the higher the children's ACE score. So this is also something that we're paying a whole lot of attention to, because while I can't point to this and say absolutely if then, what we can say is that the direction this seems to be going is more of a challenging time for young people. So the first thing that I'd really encourage you in is figure out ways to support there. Treatment remains incredibly elusive on this subject. Since the last time I was here, the first ever medical manual on all things cannabis has been published. It's called Cannabis in Medicine: An Evidence-Based Approach by Springer Publishing. The editor's Dr. Ken Finn with 2 N's. And that is every subspecialty of medicine. He kind of got the thought leaders to contribute, and it's a desk reference. It's also required learning for physicians all over the country now. And I wrote the chapter on treatment and recovery. And we learned a lot. It was the first, and I think to date, the only published information that we have on treatment of cannabis use disorder, which has changed quite a bit. One of the things that we're really encouraging is treatment providers to start to learn more about this, particularly CWS, cannabis withdrawal syndrome, which we've got 2 medications in phase 2 FDA trials for. We don't have any pharmacologic interventions right now. We got plenty of people doing stuff off label, but the sooner you can get on lessening the physical detox somebody has from any withdrawals from any substance, the better they do. And again, that's kind of generalized, but we've learned that with Suboxone and prior to that methadone. And we really can do a lot of good if we can help the physical urges to calm down with people. I'll leave it here with my monologue, and then I'd love to field any questions if there are any. 2 years ago, many folks here made a really gutsy decision when you guys kept dispensaries out of town. I've been surprised at how many dispensaries I see driving around town, but I understand these are county pockets inside of what I would consider to be Billings, but maps are whatever. There have been plenty of folks that have noticed it, and plenty of people who've paid attention, and you've seen other communities do the same. And I just want to kind of come back 2 years later and tip my hat to it. We know that we've got good data that says that the closer a kid is to a dispensary, the more access they have to it, the higher their use is. So anything here is better. Any movement away from proximity and then normalization is really solid. The next big step that somebody's going to take in this country, Vermont has capped potency on the flower, which we will kind of continue to see as rather meaningless, because it's not about the flower, it's what you derive from the flower. It just takes a little more organic material, but weed is cheap, it's easy to produce. The thing that I'm encouraging folks to consider, and I guess you more than anybody else, because I see some real willpower, we need a THC cap. Somewhere, at some point, this country, a community or a state has got to put a cap on the THC of the products that are being sold. And Colorado attempted this in House Bill 1317, which was a lot of fun to be a part of. Not really. we had the nation's lobby descend on us, very frankly, because a cap there would signal a little bit of a hole in the dam, if you will. And Colorado, not surprised, I'm not proud, but we buckled. We really did. It was a co-sponsored bill, 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats. And in the end, they said, well, the political reality is we can't. So I have been focused more on states where I think you might not be quite so impressed by people in Armani suits from Washington, D.C. Here, Oregon, Wyoming, who still remains an illegal state, but if they do, I think they'll have a potency cap off the bat. If I can encourage you in really just the 2 things here, advocate for and give resources to youth mental health and wellness, because it is deteriorating. And there's really no expectation that that's going to reverse. And I would just implore you to think very seriously about being the first place in this country that puts a cap on the products. Make the cap 90%, I don't care. Anything. The farther from zero, this is simple math, and I can say with a surety, the farther from zero, the greater the harm. But any cap is better than the 99.9% pure products that we have in the stores today. There's a couple of minutes from me. Is there anything I can answer or point you towards?
Ben, thank you very much. I had the privilege of hearing your presentation on United Way today, and we don't have the visuals here, but you had one slide that was very impactful, I believe, for that whole group, and it showed the average concentration of THC over time from the Stone Age, or at least the 1960s, the present time. And I wonder if you can describe that, even if you don't have the picture, and also the sample. That wasn't a national sample, I don't think. So describe that, and to what extent do you think that picture would also be representative of the situation here in Montana and Billings?
To be very fair, as a Gen Xer, we consider that the Bronze Age.
Okay.
There was
Yeah.
sorry. Yes, beginning in 1960, we started collecting a representative sample of all cannabis that was confiscated by law enforcement in all 50 states. And what you saw play out there was what mass spec and sound science has presented to us prior to, which is that what naturally occurs inside of the cannabis plant is somewhere between a 0.2 and a 0.5% THC. Now, there were forms that were higher, most of them around religious traditions, 2 in particular, where you would maybe see 4, 5, 6 in some time, maybe even as high as 8% THC, which would have been pretty intense stuff, what they probably would have referred to as hash. So from 1960 to 1974, that average went from a national average of 0.2 to a national average of 0.7. In the 70s, you kind of continued this good incline, which was basically just good gardening. It really was selective breeding and cloning, which is what we came about, and more cannabis indica being grown than sativa. And where you end is in the 2000s, where we crested, in 2012, we just crested 10% THC potency. So you just got double digits. I have been able to gather the data from Colorado, which has been no small feat at all. In fact, I was threatened with lawsuits over it by our enforcement division. But Freedom of Information Acts win out in the end, don't they? The average product sold in the state of Colorado as of 2020, which is last year I have data for, the average is 69% THC potency, was as high as 99.9% pure THC potency. So the problem that we have, and why I so appreciate the vernacular shift at the beginning, sir, was that cannabis is a plant. Cannabis has been around forever. Cannabis really, like, who cares, says the treatment provider and recovering drug addict. That's not the problem. The problem is this super high potency stuff. So around 10%, you start to see some real issues. At 16%, they get noticeable, and they increase the higher you get. Those products are your products. They are here. If you have not been to a dispensary, I would strongly encourage that, and not on an official tour where they're going to show you all the cute stuff. Go in and ask, what are people buying? Where's the strong stuff? What should I go with? Is that an adequate
Yeah,
answer?
no, very good. Appreciate that. Other questions? Councilmember Joy? Councilmember Ripsis?
Thank you very much. I unfortunately wasn't able to hear your presentation in the morning. So I would, as you know, you're speaking very persuasively about the need for a cap. I'm not sure if that really comes within the city council purview. It certainly does at the state level, but at the city council level. But what we can do at the city council level is really turn our attention towards educating youth on the dangers and do that preventative stuff. That would be really good for us. And I have a question and then I have a follow-up. But do you find that in youth, there isn't just a single substance that is being abused? So, like I would say alcohol is something that is really pretty, I think most kids would not consider that a drug or a narcotic. They would consider alcohol just beer and not really understanding the impacts of alcohol. So if we were able to fund some kind of education program, how do you think we could message that? Or would we want to have a message that's simply geared towards THC and cannabis use? Or would we want to, if we were limited, would we want to make that broader in terms of prevention for alcohol or any other substances that youth would be experimenting with? I know that's a big question, but just from your experience, how does messaging for that really work? Thank you.
Well, thanks for such an insightful question. Of course, the other substances. I mean, we've never seen overdose rates like we have before. Alcohol remains the most destructive substance in this country, far and away. The reason why we think alcohol is as destructive as it is because it has the lowest perceived risk. And it has the lowest perceived risk because corporate America. Like if I'm going to a game back home, I'm going to Coors Field. What we know, so there's this, I promise I'm going to stay concise. This is going to seem a little, but inside of 2 minutes, I'll answer this whole thing. CDC refers to something called associated deviant behaviors. And associated deviant behavior is when a kid, what we're just talking about with youth, when a kid does something they know they shouldn't. When a kid does something that's sort of against social norms. And no matter what the substance is, we know at underage use, it's all deviant use. And so an associated deviant behavior, the reason why associated is because you tend to do other deviant behaviors. And you can't isolate them, but we can say for sure that the kid having, the young person having unprotected sex is more likely to consume tobacco. The person consuming tobacco is more likely to consume all of these other things. So prevention of all of these substances is absolutely the most important thing that we can think about. And interestingly, most of the academics would tell you that would begin with tobacco, because tobacco seems to be everybody's initial foray into these things. The difference with tobacco is it's not mood altering. So yes, I would very strongly encourage a more holistic program, because what we know about substance use disorder is that it is all substances and even some behavioral. To isolate one substance, like we've done with the opioid crisis, if you will, in this country, is to misunderstand the fundamentals of addiction. That comes about from genetics, from adverse childhood events, from untreated mental illness, not because somebody likes the taste of something. So what we're pushing for so hard with this THC thing is we do not want them to initiate in youth. And so many of them are initiating because of how youth-friendly these products are. Bubblegum flavored vape pens, popping THC candies, sodas with 80 milligrams of sugar. if we could delay youth experimentation with all mood-altering substances plus tobacco until mid-20s, I would live in a different world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Rupsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Ben, I want to get into what we specifically should be challenged to do. As you know, it wasn't actually this body that 2 years ago said we're not going to have retail sales of marijuana in the city limits. It was the voters.
Yeah.
Right. But we do have medical use, and we have a few providers in the city. So we could have some impact there, but certainly not as much as the county could, or even as much, certainly, as the state could. It seems to me if we're going to have medical use of a substance, one of the things that most medications try to do is give you a good idea of what you're actually consuming, how much of that you're, right? And so when you talk about potency caps and measurements and those types of things, we have none of those limitations right now. Mm-hmm. Should we as a city, even though it might only affect a few providers within our boundaries, really be looking at a, say, 8% flower potency, and then any derived products have to be specifically dosed at whatever milligrams, 10 milligrams, or whatever a dose of marijuana THC is, and they have to be individually dosed. They can't be up to the person to subdivide or parse out on their own. Would making those kind of steps for just the few providers we have in the city be worthwhile? When, as you saw, you can go across the street out into the county and get whatever you want, but is it a stand that we should consider as a city? And is there benefit to that?
Yeah, medications typically have dose, duration, known side effects, drug-drug interactions. Yeah, you should. And every single person who does it here can kiss your political career goodbye, because you're going to have sick and dying children marched in front of you ad nauseum. As someone who spends the majority of his life in this world, I can tell you that the data that we have right now ends medical benefit. There's absolutely medicinal benefit inside of the cannabis plant, some of it astounding in a few areas, that ends at 8% THC. There is no indication for medical use north of 8% THC. The four drugs, Marinol, Dronabinol, Sativex, and Epidiolex, that are cannabis derived, that you can get most of those from your doctor. The one that's got THC in it is an 8% THC, a 6% CBD. So there is for sure sound science to stand on to do that. I've just seen too many times when Colorado tried to make a potency cap at 90%. There was a waiting room, there were lines out the hall of children who wouldn't survive the next 5 years. And I was personally told and pointed to a young lady that I would rather see her dead. I was told, I have post-traumatic stress disorder myself. I was told that I want to see military veterans die because I don't have a contract with the military to treat them. And the only relief they would get is this. Scientifically, you're in the right. Politically, you're dead if you do that. I'd love it if somebody died on that hill.
Can you send me suggested language? I'm willing to die on that hill. I don't care.
I will.
Thank you.
You might
I've been dying on that
overestimate.
hill for a decade, brother.
Might overestimate the value we put on those political continuing our current position. Councilmember Owen.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you. Mayor, I have two questions. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It's very helpful. This council has started to tread into where we can target fairly limited resources in prevention activities. They're difficult to fund in the private sector. They're the kind of things where you need long-term money and long-term vision. And our theory has generally been based on many of our public safety crises have their origins in public health crises. And so that's where we've been trying to target our prevention resources. So you said a couple of things that I want to try to understand as we think through where we could be most effective. You were talking a little bit about the link between THC use and ACEs, and we've talked a lot as a council about ACEs, not as much as I'd like, but certainly a lot. I know it's hard to do correlation versus causation, which comes first, but generally, is there any science that suggests that adult caregivers are using THC and that is resulting in mental health, abuse of other substances, family violence, child abuse? Or are those things happening and adult caregivers are using THC to medicate the harms of it? Do we have any sense?
You're going to have to let me research this a little bit, and hopefully you know from last time that when I say that, I'll give you the answer. Like, I'll give you what you're asking for, Tom. So what I would fall back on is and you're going to have to follow me through two precepts here. The first being that perception of risk is the single biggest indicator for youth use. No matter what it is, whatever it is, the higher the perceived risk, the lower the youth use. One of it's actually their friends is the first one, but one of the biggest contributing factors is people who are in a position of authority. So that's obviously parents and caregivers are the biggest ones. So as you see parental perceptions of this continue to decline with risk, you will see that with kids, which will increase it. But I mean, I'll tell you what I want to say, but it would just be anecdotal. So let me see if I can find you some real empirical data there.
I'd appreciate that. And then you're sort of hinting at my next question. You've talked a little bit about withdrawal and some of those challenges. But I'm hearing, at least from some providers in the community, that the thing that's not getting talked about very much is straight up poisoning from edibles, from just consuming too much, and even a little psychosis. Are those things real?
Last year, I worked on a 5-part piece with the Washington Post on this whole thing. And it was fun because that's where I got sober. They had us pull our data in the treatment center where I work for cannabis-induced psychosis. And what we found was, so when you think of drug-induced psychosis, we all think of amphetamines. Mm-hmm. That is what causes drug-induced psychosis. We treated 40 cases of cannabis-induced psychosis for every 1 case of amphetamine-induced psychosis. So is cannabis-induced psychosis real? The ICD-10 codes coming out of the hospitals will tell us that they are real to an extent of an average of 30 cases per day per Colorado Emergency Department. And it's simple because ICD-10 has a code for that. We have cannabis poisoning and cannabis poisoning intentional, cannabis poisoning unintentional. Cannabis-induced psychosis is the great story. THC-induced psychosis, it's the great story, yes.
And what about the poisoning? Especially the unintentional poisoning. How often are kids just taking edibles and not realizing how much they've taken?
It definitely happens, and when it happens, it's all over the news because they're so gut-wrenching. There's been fatalities associated with it, but again, I don't have sound data for that, but much less than the intentional, which is I consume a part of an edible and then I don't feel what I want to, so I consume the rest and have multiple doses in that. As far as the purity of the products, since we don't have, I mean, Montana as a state doesn't have an FDA. You don't have the ability to, and I'm guessing as a city, we're not going in there and getting a true representative sample, which is roughly 5%, and testing prior to it going to market. And the things that we want to be testing for, and these are all over the journals. In fact, I have another book coming out next month where I go into detail about this. These are heavy metals, particularly lead because of the nature of the cannabis plant and how the anchor root goes down. But it's pesticides and growth accelerators that are the big things. You can't, this is a farming world here, you're in ranching, but let's go with the farming side. We rotate our crops for a number of reasons, but one of the big issues that you have in one crop growth inside is you tend to build little things that eat them. What is it? Yeah, bugs, whatever they're called. These little guys, and if you continue to grow one product, they get really, really focused on that one thing. And so you rotate the products so that you don't just get this one parasite that's continuing to go after it. And then you've got to change your pesticides because they get used to the pesticides. The growth cycle has moved completely and totally indoors. Cannabis should take 90 to 120 days to grow. We can produce one from seed to harvest in as little as 22 days now. And so what we have to do with that is really rapid growth accelerators, which end up in the consumable then, as well as really aggressive pesticides. And the problem you have is that since there's no FDA oversight, nobody's coming in and saying, let's test this before it goes out to market. You find it after it's been in market. There's just a huge, in fact, Mike Tyson's weed brand just had a massive recall today that took place in the state of California from heavy metals.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Other questions for Ben? I don't see anything else. So Ben, we know where to find you. I hope you enjoy your time in Billings. We appreciate you coming up here. On the issue of legislation, I heard you make reference to a model that exists for, that would impose caps on potency on THC. I would appreciate it if you would distribute that as far as you can, because I'm sure we're going to want to take a look at that.
Gladly, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Very good, thank you. This is a public meeting, so if anybody would like to comment on this topic, please come to the podium. We just ask that you tell us your name and address and keep your comments to 3 minutes. So is there any public comment on item number 1? Any public comment on item number 1? No one's coming forward, no one's online, and Councilmember Tiswell is with us by online. So if I fail to see his little yellow hand, would direct you guys keep your eyes open for him. So, okay. Then we will close the public comment period and move on to item number 2. Chris.
Mayor and Council, so back in approximately 2022, shortly after the second public safety levy and the work that was done by Center for Public Safety Management, council and staff began looking for someone who could do similar work, third-party, independent analysis of our court and our prosecution functions. And so keeping it brief, with help from some of you, as well as the judges, or at that time judge, and we now have 2 judges. We'll get the second judge introduced here shortly. And our city attorney's office went through our RFP process and ultimately selected and signed a contract back in June of 2023 with CGL, who is here tonight. So first up, there is Paul Volnar, Paul Thomas, and Jeff Fine from CGL. They're going to present material. They're going to hand it off to our city attorney, who's going to cover some components, and she's going to hand it off to our judges. They've got some information for you, and then hopefully we'll have a very fruitful dialogue after that, all of which is designed to do the best that we can in understanding what their analysis and recommendations to are on running the most efficient, effective operation we can relative to these 2 functions specific. Their analysis of a very fast-changing criminal justice system that we have in our community, and ultimately presenting us with their findings and recommendations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Volnar, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Chris. And Council, I'm just going to make the suggestion that we hold our questions until we've had the presentation by CGL, also Gina and the judges, and then it's open season. There's so much here. There's no structured way to really try to guide our discussion, but I promise you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. But that way, if we could jump into questions now, I'm afraid we'll never get to the other presentations. So, Paul, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mayor Cole. Thank you, council members. We appreciate everyone. This is a pleasure to present this tonight for you all. So we want to keep it summarized as well. It's a very comprehensive report, a lot of information. Hopefully everyone's had a chance at least to glance at it, if not read through, and hope you all have questions. If not, We will take questions after the fact in the coming days and weeks if you have questions. So my name is Paul Volnar. I'm with CGL. Also Jeff Fine and Paul Thomas. They have a combined of 60 years of court experience, as well as I have a 10 years experience with CGL working in the justice industry. So our overview. So we're gonna open with comments, considerations, approach and methodology, issues and recommendations, implementation update. So the courts have already taken it upon themselves to start implementing some of the recommendations based upon our issues and analysis, which is great to hear. So, and then finally, we'll wrap it up with questions. So, hey, like I said, we're excited to be here. We want to work with you, help the community, and see things forward. Given the substantial amount of information in the report, we want to ensure adequate time for your questions. Therefore, our presentation is structured to provide an overview and highlight to the report. Much of what we'll be hearing this evening represents what we believe is greatest opportunities. It's also what we feel is the highest priority for everyone to consider. We want to thank Gina Dahl, Britannia, Park, and Councilmember Owen, and anyone else that we maybe left off. There was a big group of folks that we interviewed in the process. So we appreciate everyone's time and effort. Many of these issues that we found and that are in the report are common issues. They're issues that we see across the country. You know, these are not uncommon. Much of what we'll be discussing comes from issues in the analysis section. It's about 30 pages. That's the biggest bulk and detail and backup of this report. So the approach and methodology, the biggest things here is this is the information that we identified through collecting the data, interviews, and also the site visit of the new building that you guys are constructing, or that's under renovations at the Stillwater building. These are the consensus of what we confirmed in our approach to providing in the different draft reports. So we had 2 draft reports, as well as we identified and defined the issues up front and with the group early on in the process. I'll hand this off to Jeff.
Mayor and Council, good evening. It's an honor to be here. My name is Jeff Fine, and I'm a consultant for CGL. It really is an honor to be here. In my 29 years in the courts as an administrator, as a judge, I've spent much of my time, I believe, focused on improving access to justice and positive justice outcomes. It really is an honor to be able to help another community with some of the experience that I've had over the years. Most of my time was spent as an administrator, and as you can imagine, as an administrator, you focus on processes, you focus on data, you focus on customer service. Courts are very document-driven. You focus on operations associated with documents. Right now, in my other full-time position, I write on the part-time for this. I oversee a team of 650 individuals, and one of the things I do when I talk to new employees is I say, your job may seem as if it's about money, data, and documents, because every day you deal with money, data, and documents. But it is not about money, data, and documents. It's about people's lives. That's what the courts are all about. And the courts are a complex environment. They become more complex as laws continue to evolve and new situations in society continue to evolve, like we just heard just a moment ago. And the individuals that come to courts are facing the most challenging moments of their lives. So helping them navigate the system and creating systems that are efficient, promote positive justice outcomes, and really make a difference in people's lives. The limited jurisdiction courts, the city courts, sometimes don't get as much attention as your larger courts, your district courts, where they handle felonies, other types of matters. But I will tell you this, a person is more likely to end up when they're in court to end up in a municipal court or a justice court than they are in a district court. This is where most court interactions with society, where people have most interaction with the judicial branch. I say all this because I commend you for taking interest in this and for taking an interest in justice in your community. It's very commendable, and I'm honored to be part of that. So as Paul stated, we're presenting this evening. We have to keep it brief. We could talk for hours. We could literally keep you here until 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. We were told to keep it to 20 to 30 minutes. And so what you'll be hearing this evening, as Paul stated, are what we believe your greatest opportunities. Although we're presenting at a high level, if you have not, I'm sure you probably went through the executive summary. For those of you who felt you could spend an hour or two on it, the issues and analysis section, that executive summary just has the recommendations. If you go to the issue and analysis section, section 3, there is detail, there is context, there is information that helps identify how it is, why these things are important. It has the background, it has the context, and it will help individuals see a path to implementation. So if you haven't read that, I do suggest that you look there for details. On the screen, you will see, this is just an outline of what we're going to be presenting over the next few minutes. We initially identified from that data that we collected, from the interviews that we did, we identified 25 issues. We then went back to the stakeholders, the criminal justice stakeholders in Billings that you connected us with, and asked them, are these indeed the issues? Is this what you are telling us are the challenges that you face? Please give us some feedback. And we confirmed those things before we proceeded. Then we went into an analysis phase where we looked at those issues, looked for recommendations, and we were able to categorize them into 15 areas. Those are the 15 areas, numbered 1 through 15, in section 3 of your report, the issues and analysis. Among those 15 areas, there are kind of 3 themes that stick out as being the most primary, and they are associated with jail capacity, with your jail, overcrowding, and the effects of that on justice when jail space is needed, automation and information sharing. And the last category, it's a little bit broad, and it has several recommendations in it, but it is enhancing justice and efficiency. You're going to hear a little bit this evening about focusing on early resolution of cases and the benefits associated with that, streamlining processes, and promoting voluntary compliance. These are going to be some substantial themes. So we're going to tell you kind of what we think are some of the more important issues tonight. And for those that we don't cover, and there will be some that we don't cover, rest assured they are in that section 3 of our report. I'm now going to turn it over to Paul Thomas. We're going to go back and forth on presenting some of the issues, and Paul is going to speak to the first, jail capacity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to the mayor and city council. You know, I retired a couple of years ago, and after 35 years of presenting to city councils, I said, I won't have to present to city councils anymore, but alas, here I am. Glad to be here. I'm going to take the jail capacity issue, and Jeff and I will go back and forth. And when you look at that statement up there, what really stands out is right in the middle where it says, the lack of available jail space when needed is threatening the effectiveness of court decisions and the judicial system's role in addressing criminal behavior. I think that says it all. When a court can't have jailing options available to it, what is the court going to do in terms of enforcement, making people comply and do all the things they're required to do? And it leads to a basic public safety issue ultimately. We learned this morning that the city is proactive and have something in the works already with respect to jail capacity, so that's extremely laudable. We're delighted to hear that because we didn't know what to expect on that issue. It's a challenging issue. It involves financing and money and cooperation with the county, and it's laudable that you're moving in that direction. I will point out there are other things that can be done to mitigate the jail population. I'd like to point those out. Later in our discussion, we'll talk about what we call FTAs, failure to appear. When a person fails to appear, you have to issue a warrant, which means they're arrested and they're in jail. Failure to comply. If a defendant fails to comply with what's required by the court, you may have to issue another warrant that means an arrest, and they're in jail. So if you have success with appearances, if you have success with compliance, you may not have to issue those warrants and see those people in jail. There's some alternatives that can be considered. Electronic monitoring is one of them. We had a jail issue in Mesa, city of Mesa, where I work, Mesa, Arizona. Population of 600,000. We handled 130,000 cases, so efficiency was a big item for us. So we did electronic monitoring for defendants that could not afford to post bond. We would do electronic monitoring, which would track them, require them to appear at their next court appearance. As a court, we picked that expense up. It was like $3 a day, because the daily cost for incarceration was over $100 a day. So the city council at that time was glad to have that money difference in savings. So that's something we pointed out as a possible option. Things that you're already doing that we're learning about is cooperative efforts with the county in terms of jail capacity. Something we'll talk about a little bit later is early resolution of cases, which is a theme that's running in a lot of our report. And if you're able to resolve cases sooner at the initial appearance, at arraignments and so on, that limits the requirement to come back for so many court appearances, and it limits perhaps the missing of a court appearance where you might have to issue a warrant for them to appear, and that's a jail impact. I think we're going to pick up on a lot of those issues a little bit later. I won't elaborate right now, but the point being that aside from increasing jail capacity, there are a lot of other things that could be done procedurally and operationally to mitigate lowering the jail population. Thank you. Yeah.
And just real quick, Paul and I were going to, make sure that on each item, if we have something else we want to share, we'll kind of help each other out in that regard. One thought that came to mind when we talked about pretrial monitoring, we talked about ankle bracelets just a moment ago. Those are already being used in your system, and they are being funded by some grant money that is provided. However, sometimes what is ordered when people are released is to have multiple types of things that are imposed upon them. As opposed to them being in jail, maybe checking in, getting drug testing. That grant only pays for one of those services. So for example, somebody may have 2 or 3 requirements that may cost maybe $20, $25, $30 a day, but they don't have the $10 or the $20 to cover the portion that's not covered by the grant. So you have people in jail that you're paying $100 a day because they can't afford the $10 a day to get out of jail. So one of the recommendations in there, for example, is for you to fully fund that and not ask the taxpayers to pay the $100, but maybe $10 a day might be a more reasonable number if that's the only thing keeping them from being able to be in society pursuant to a judicial order. And Paul mentioned options. One of the things that we have talked at length regarding the jail is collaborative opportunities where courts sometimes share operations. I know you'll probably want to talk about it later. I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later too. Something that we call kind of an arraignment center concept where you're sharing resources and you're collaborating with multiple jurisdictions to create efficiencies. And not only that, getting organizations working together, which can then promote more positive justice outcomes. I'd like to speak next about automation. It is the second theme of the 3. I will tell you that in my most recent role in the court system, I probably, when it comes to improvements, I would say 70% of our focus on improving operations, improving efficiency, improving justice outcomes comes helping people navigate the court system, extending services online, relates to technology. It is an area of great opportunity. Not that you have bad technology, you have current technology. Real quick, about technology in general. Courts tend to trail other sectors of business and government in our use of technology. You know, a lot of private business has been using AI, for example, to read documents and to send notifications and do some other things. You know, the courts are just now getting into emerging technologies to help them with their administrative role. Much of what we do in the courts, with files being electronic, with us tracking the things that occur in a case, with us when the judge makes an order and the staff has to act upon it and they have to give out notifications and send documents and send data to others. Much of what we do touches technology. Most courts could not operate if the technology didn't turn on in the morning. In my court, all of our documents are digital. We would literally be unable to operate if our technology didn't work. So that's how reliant we are upon it, how much it is ingrained in our operations. Most communities have multiple criminal justice technology platforms. I'd be willing to bet your police department, they obviously have a different, your court has court software. Your prosecutor has prosecution software that are made by different vendors. Your police department has a different, made by somebody who provides them with something that police need. And your jails run on a different automated system as well. There are multiple technology platforms, and that creates both challenge, but it creates also opportunity. Especially with nowadays, there has never been a point in my 29 years in the court system where technology is now more capable of integrating than now. Over the years, I've held my fingers up to my staff and say, look, we're going to make investments in these types of technologies, and you wait and see. There'll be a day when we will be able to integrate these things. And that's happened. That's happening. Platforms more and more have the ability to speak with one another and to transfer data, to share information. So, but again, your jurisdiction, your city has multiple platforms, just like almost every other city and every other county in the country. Because laws and processes vary from state to state and court to court, these technology platforms that courts use must be tailored on a state-by-state and sometimes a city-by-city basis based upon the procedures and the way each of them operate. And one thing that's unique about Billings is you are the largest, you know this, why am I telling you this? You're the largest city in the state. You're the largest jurisdiction in the state. That also means you have few others to benchmark against or to really, to be honest with you, there are very few peers that you can meaningfully engage with. That is both a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to lead operations, to lead what improvements that you test here because of the volume you have could benefit the entire state of Montana. These challenges often result in lack of convenient access to information on other systems. That's something we've heard from your criminal justice individuals across different agencies, it's hard to access information that they need on each other's systems. Inability to transfer information between systems. And these type of things hinder efficiency and hinder positive justice outcomes. System integration and other approaches identified in our recommendations, and there are 6 of them in this section, serve to address issues such as reducing or eliminating redundant entry. When a police department cites a case, they type in a name, they type in an address, they do this type of information, they type in personal information. Oftentimes, that information doesn't flow electronically to the court in many communities across the nation. So what happens is you enter that same data again, and sometimes prosecutors do the same thing. They enter it in their system. Public defenders enter it in their system. We're entering the same data over and over and over again unless the systems are integrated or connected. So the other recommendations we have serve to promote access to justice. Individuals, particularly in city courts, many of the offenses, the civil offenses, what you call municipal offenses, they're civil offenses. But even misdemeanors in our state, there are certain actions that you can take in your case. You can exercise certain options online. Your website has the opportunity to educate people so that when they, and it has to be easy to navigate. During the pandemic, court systems across the nation pretty much had to create technology to do everything online to resolve your case. Appear on the screen, sign things electronically, receive your documents electronically. Read about your processes and learn about them. Learn how to navigate the system through reading things on the screen. So access to justice. Technology promotes access to justice. It also promotes efficiency through automating processes. In the last system, the current system that I'm still in, and a system I've been part of for many years, we've been able to use technology. We had a process by which when documents came in, they would be sorted manually, and then now we can drop them in a scanner. The scanner reads them, reads the name, enters the information in the system, dockets the case. So it used to be a 5 or 6 step process. Technology has allowed us to become more efficient. Drop the documents in the scanner. It does everything. It comes up on the screen. It says, does this look right? Yes, bam, we're done. And so so technology can be used to trigger events. Paul had mentioned, for example, when someone fails to appear in court, there are certain things that happen when somebody fails to appear in court. And many times court systems have to do those things manually. In Paul's last court, they programmed it when somebody hit the button, they failed to appear in court. It did all the things. It did the proper notifications. It prepared the documents. It did it in automated fashion. So there's the opportunity to automate processes. Sometimes technology can be tailored to do this, but it has to be done on a community by community basis. And we have some information in our report that talks about how it is to identify these opportunities. And I'll also say that in terms of efficiencies, it helps to mitigate staffing challenges. I'm not sure about you. I have heard that I know that in my home state, we're having significant issues with staffing. Sometimes it's hard to find people that want to come work in government, to come downtown to the area where I am. Retention is a bit of an issue as well. So there are staffing challenges. So by implementing technology, you may not be able to reduce staffing, but one of the things you can do is you can reduce, with individuals turning over more frequently, you can reduce the information that they have to learn. And it makes it much easier to integrate new staff. And it really does mitigate the effects of growth. I see your growth rates are rather moderate here, but you're still growing. That being said, technology can help you mitigate the need of having to add additional resources by leveraging technology. Some of the strategies recommended in the report are, and the big one is putting together a work group. Because we often get asked, what's the magic bullet? How do we do all of this? How do we implement technology, get things to talk with one another? And you really have to get a group together to talk about what actually inventory, what needs they have. What does the police department need? What would the prosecutors like to see in other systems? What do they need to see that they're not being able to see conveniently now? Here's a real common one. Being able to transmit documents electronically. That's really kind of a basic one. The prosecutor being able to file documents in the court without actually having to print them up and stack them up, carry them down and drop them off at the counter. The police being able to file now you're doing some of this already, but the transfer of documents is always an opportunity in most court systems to save a lot of time and promote efficiency in the court system that can be redirected toward processes that bring more value to the individuals that are walking through the door. When I can shorten the time at the counter that my staff spends doing this, here's the big benefit of that. People say, what's the benefit? How's it going to save you money? You know what it does? It frees up time so that my staff can stop doing redundant stuff and they can actually spend quality time with individuals that have valid questions and concerns and help them navigate through the processes of the court system. We can provide real customer service and spend a lot less time tapping on keyboards through the application of technology. So putting together a work group, networking with peer agencies. I mentioned there are very few comparables, but you might be able to find some comparables even sometimes outside the state. I want to say this, and I'll wrap up this particular section. Your court is using a technology platform, this is common, that is shared with other courts around the state. So that you don't have your own automated system. The cool thing about that is if you can find ways through this process of, through what we kind of outlined, to customize that, you have the volume to test things and do things that other courts may not have the opportunity to do. So what you do here can benefit others. But here's the other thing too, it may also limit you. The state may say, we don't have the capacity for you to lend customization. You'll have to demonstrate the value of it and how it may bring value to others, but it may also limit you. So there's the potential that Billings may need to consider if they're unable to customize, if they're unable to make these tailoring, do this tailoring, the integration themselves. You may actually have to change platforms into something where you have a direct relationship with a vendor versus you're sharing that relationship with 50 other courts, and it's being managed by the state. Again, that's kind of the overview of that area. We'll move on to, excuse me, sorry. It's not digital, it's paper. That's the problem. So, all right. And our final of the three.
You got that? I think we're a couple behind.
Oh, sorry.
That's me. Oh, you got it.
Yep.
Okay. Technology.
There we go.
Thanks, Jeff. A little note about technology. I started in the courts in 1985, and I was mandated to update and automate the court and bring it into the 20th century. So I ordered a fax machine, and the county board wouldn't approve it because they said the court didn't need exotic equipment. So, let's talk about court processes a little bit. Several years ago, I was challenged to build a new courthouse in Mesa, Arizona, $38 million. And it was going to be a big project, and I was lead for the court. So the architects, the engineers came, and they said, we're going to look at your business processes, and we're going to come up with a design to support your business. And I said, no. I said, we're not going to do that. I said, I'm going to tell you what the future business process will be for us, and we'll design the building around that. So I brought the best consultants I could find in the country, National Center for State Courts, to come in. We spent several weeks looking at the business of a city court. And we handled about 130,000 cases. So how do you best come up with a business model to support that demand? So the consultants basically said, upfront settlement of case, settle that case as soon as you possibly can when it comes through the system. So that forced us to look at resourcing the initial appearance when the defendant first appears in front of a judge. Is there an opportunity there to settle that case? Misdemeanors, many of them are minor cases. They're not a public threat. And there may be an opportunity to even divert that case into services or something right at the initial appearance. Second to that would be the arraignment. So in that courthouse design, we dedicated 2 arraignment courts on the second floor next to prosecutor and public defender. And we made it more or less a procedural mandate to try to settle cases at the arraignment setting. The arraignment setting is about 30 days out from the initial appearance in Arizona, or 30 days out after you get the citation, issued. So there was a 30-day window for which police reports had to be put together, the prosecutors to put a plea agreement or potential offer together to be ready to settle that case at that time, 30 days down the line. So there was a lot of pushback from prosecutors that we can't be ready, we can't get police reports. In our meetings, we basically said, or I said, your issues are our issues. If you have trouble, we'll deal with it, we'll come together, we'll figure out how to fix that. We need to settle these cases at a sooner point in time. So once those 2 dedicated arraignment divisions were fully operational, things were happening, cases were settling, and at one point we were settling 65% of our cases at the arraignment setting, done out the door. The impact of that in terms of financially is that one of the more expensive things that you get into with courts is funding a court, a judge, a staff, support people for a court division. So when you're eliminating 60% of your caseload right out the door, you don't have the demand later to fund judges and staff and more courtrooms and more buildings. So it offloads a lot of the caseload right at the arraignment point. So that was part of the financial justification for saying, if we can settle cases at arraignment, we don't need to continuously fund additional judges and judge space. So I wanted to make that a key point because we do have a demonstrated success model, in that arraignment model. There are ways to be efficient in the court process. You know, traditionally, court processes are kind of protracted. The case comes in, there's a set of procedures that are followed. Sometimes lawyers have a lot of continuances. Misdemeanors aren't always a priority for attorneys. They've got felony cases, so they push back misdemeanors. And so you have to really work at making the process a little more efficient, maybe policing a little bit of that activity as the case goes on. But misdemeanors tend to be repetitive. You see the same kind of cases over and over again, trespassing, for example, and whatever. So that also gives you the opportunity to come up with programs and procedures that deals with particular case situations, because the situations are very similar case to case. And so there's opportunities even to do diversion. So if you have counseling and services available, maybe you can just divert that case out, not drag it through the court process in its entirety. Another thing that can be done, I think, is how we deal with the defendants. The court processes are complex. They're difficult to understand, I think, by a lot of average individuals. They get a case, they're not sure what to do. So communication, information, and all of that being made available to defendants helps that process along. The web is a great place to do this. So if you have expanded web services that defendants can access, it tells them about the court process, it gives them instructions, it simplifies forms, that makes the court process a lot easier. In Mesa, we really exploited web capabilities, and we did things like on certain offenses, if there was a warrant issued, you could go online, post a bond, the warrant would cancel. The cancellation would go to the police department. The case would be updated in a new court date given to that defendant, all by way of the web. Now, these weren't serious offenses. They were routine failure to appear type things, but we sought to even automate, the canceling of warrants right through the web. So that was a large court with a lot of cases. That was a big help. One thing that came up is, and we're going to add it here, is the National Center has a set of what they call performance measures, and we've identified them in the report. And like anything you do in business or even the courts, you have to understand your own business. You have to understand how well you're doing what you're doing. And so you have to measure things along those lines. So we had recommended a number of the standard performance measures that National Center produces, because those are standard from court to court. So if ultimately you want to compare your performance to another court, you would do it through that. Jeff?
And gentlemen, just ask you to try to wrap up as soon as you can.
Got it. All right. So I'll be real quick on this. Defendant failure to appear and failure to comply. The numbers, and I'm sorry, you'll have to excuse me, I don't have the number with me on the paper here, but the number of warrants issued out of the court, I believe last year, was equal to about approximately half of the caseload, a very substantial number of warrants. And so failure to comply, when people don't do what they're supposed to do, they don't appear, they don't follow a court order, the cost is significant. I'll give you a quick example and I'll move on from this. But it is, in my court, when we did an analysis, a deep analysis of the cost of it, when somebody failed to appear and we issued a warrant, an officer, when they pulled them over, they would spend about 45 minutes on the side of the road waiting for the car to be towed, take the person to jail. That booking process was a multiple hour process. And basically it was taking anywhere from 5 to 8 hours just to book somebody in jail on the warrant so they could see a judge on maybe a traffic ticket they failed to appear on. So we took a traffic unit, we took a police officer for a small city off the road for an entire shift. The cost of a patrol unit was about $100 an hour, and this analysis was done over a decade ago. And so then the booking fee was about $300 to book them in the jail, and then the rate was about $100 a day. We determined that anytime we issued a warrant, my court staff was kind of like, Judge, it really can't cost that much. It's, a couple dollars for us to do this in labor, 5 minutes. We send it over to the police department. Police department spends 45 minutes doing all the things that they need to do to get the warrant put into the NCIC and the systems that it goes into. Cost of a warrant, $1,500. So one of the things that we did, recommendation in here, just as one example of many in this report, we recommend, for example, sending text messages to people, reminding them to appear in court. When I need to be at a doctor's appointment, I get a text message. When I have a barber appointment, I get a text message. When I need to pick up something at the pharmacy, I get a text message. But generally speaking, across the nation, we don't use that for the courts. But there's a tremendous cost when people don't follow up. So again, spend maybe 1/10 of a cent on a text message. We did a study where we notified people and reminded them of their court appearances. It improved appearance rates by 70%. We reduced the number of people who failed to appear in my court by 70% by doing that. So that's just an example. I just wanted to kind of let you know just how important the issue is. And of course, when somebody fails to appear, your judges are prepared to see them, prosecutors prepared, and now you have to set that for another appointment later on. And you have to pay dearly to do that. When some of these tools that are available to us that are now more commonplace can really help improve justice and can reduce cost for your taxpayers. They improve outcomes for the people affected. They improve outcomes for your community. They help you save money. They're just smart. I call it smart justice. So that's just, so there's a list of, I think, eight or 9 things in our report. They're in that analysis section. They're not all recommendations, but it's like these are common approaches to promoting compliance. That will, as Paul indicated, also help reduce your jail population. Because most people that are in jail, at least from what I've found, most people are in jail on misdemeanors are not because of the initial arrest. Most of them are in jail because they failed to appear and they are arrested on a warrant. That's where most of your misdemeanor jail population is in most states in the United States. So, Paul, I'm just going to hit this one real quick. Is that okay? Go ahead. Okay. So basically, your organization, your justice system is using diversion programs. There are different types of diversion programs. What we are suggesting is to possibly look at some of how some organizations across the nation are creatively using and innovating the use of diversion. There are some that are in some larger cities where they have significant issues, where people are sometimes arrested because of something that may be associated with their economic status. They're homeless, they have no, and they, for example, they maybe go to the bathroom outside. And that would be something somebody would get arrested for and put in jail. But they have a police-based kind of diversion program where they then try to get some help for the person and they divert a case at that point. They divert it. There are some organizations that use prosecution-based. Before a case is ever filed, those cases are, the prosecution says, if you do this through an agreement, we won't file the case. In many courts, most courts across the nation, the case is filed and then people appear, sometimes 1 or 2 times, and then the case is diverted. So there's different amounts of investment. So we don't have a particular recommendation for you. It's just as to which to take. Your teams will have to investigate that, but there are different models for diversion. And we are happy to answer questions about that in coming days and weeks, and there's more information in the report. But there are different models for it, different places where things are intercepted. This next section, Paul, what we're going to do is, and we're going to wrap it up. We've got a few things here at the end.
Yeah, real quick, we'll try to end this up, but one of the questions that always comes up is who's going to do this? We heard this from the interviews. We're on board, we agree with it, but who's going to do some of these changes and everything? So in our research, it almost seemed ideal that the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee seemed to be the group that might be a leadership group in pulling together subcommittees and the work groups and taking their work and representing it at a high level so that changes could be made across jurisdictions and across agencies. So we kind of targeted the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. It already exists. There's already representatives on it that seem to represent all the entities. And it might be an ideal driver for change because of its existing status and the fact that one's represented on it. Jeff.
So one of the things I just wanted to mention that's more specific is the capacity for continuous improvement. The court is central. A lot of the court is kind of like a hub spoke situation. Your court is at the center of your system. The prosecution, the defense, the police, the jails are all acting with and interacting with the court system. They're the center of this. And one of the things that we noticed about the structure of your courts, of your court system is you have an individual, the head of your branch of government is your judge. They are the head of the judicial branch. They also sit on the bench, and they adjudicate cases. So then they have additional duties on top of that. One of them, as a presiding judge, Judge Kolar, has this additional administrative responsibility as the head, but they still have a case load to handle. Much of the administration, much of the coordination that's required to implement improvements is done by your chief appointed officer. In the court, that is your court administrator. However, your court administrator is the sole supervisor in that organization. And they are the highest appointed individual in there. So imagine your police chief asking your police chief to make some change in how the police operate, but also saying you're the only supervisor in the organization. They're going to be spending all their time handling the day-to-day, managing however many officers they have. So when we saw that your court administrator, the person who is the chief administrative officer of your organization, basically in essence the director, they're directly supervising 20 individuals, they are buried in the day-to-day. You cannot focus as well as one would like when you're handling all the things that a day-to-day supervisor does. So the recommendation here is that you look at taking your chief of police for the court, so I can make an example there, and you give them a couple sergeants so they can handle the day-to-day. She has about 20 direct reports. There are some leads but they also have workloads. So you really need some supervisors. Also, too, she is, I confirmed when I got here, she is classified at a level which would be considered a supervisor. Again, your judge is your head of a branch of government. Mayor, you're the head of the legislative branch of the city of Billings. Your judge is the head of the judicial branch. You have a city manager. But the person who reports to the judge, who is responsible for all of the operations of the court, that reports to the judge, is classified at a supervisory level. At a minimum, they're at a manager level or a deputy director level, but they're definitely not at the supervisor level. They need to be classified higher. You will not be able to implement the changes you need unless you take away the day-to-day of the head of this department and you free them up to actually focus on these things. That's what police chiefs do. That's what fire chiefs do. They focus on the strategic aspects. So that's one recommendation that we have. Last two things here, implementing a second judicial division. We applaud the city. Your caseload was such that you definitely needed a second judge. I'm sure that the amount of time that was available for the judge to be able to do things in the courtroom was somewhat limited by the brisk caseload. Adding a second judge doubles the amount of courtroom time that is available, and utilizing that expansion, using the recommendations in the report, we think would vastly increase the quality of justice, or it's an opportunity to improve, to continue to improve. It's a good opportunity. In terms of the Stillwater Court building security, there's a very comprehensive, I think it's about 3 pages long, of recommendations associated with this facility. There was significant interaction with your staff on this. There was a rather significant meeting that occurred on October 17th, went into tremendous detail. Your team has implemented what they felt that they were able to incorporate into the facility. Obviously, there are limitations because of the fact that you're retrofitting a facility. But I believe they've taken into account what it is that they could do, and that has been done. Staffing budget considerations, I think this is really the last slide. You have already the first line on here, second court division, 2 staff. a new judge, every judge needs a bailiff and a judicial assistant. So you add a judge, you had to add a judicial assistant and a bailiff. That's been done, they're in place. The span of control, this is the court supervisor or court supervisors I'm talking about. We do recommend that pursuant to that particular issue that's raised in the report, that you add 1 or 2, preferably 2 supervisors, so they each have approximately 10 staff reporting to them. We feel that's an appropriate span of control. That seems common in most government institutions. For example, going back to the police, you probably wouldn't ask a police sergeant to supervise 20 officers. You're probably going to ask them to supervise about 10. That seems to be a reasonable number. Court administrator reclassification, we just recommend you take a look at that. I think one of the challenges you'll have there is you have a lot of smaller courts around the state. There may not be as much drive there may not be as many challenges in other places across the state. So you might not find comparables on that. You might find that administrators in other places around the state, but we contend that your operation here, given your size, is unique and significant. And the last thing about future funding, and that is this, efficiencies realized through enhancements. When you go through, we recommend a committee structure to go through these things in the report, decide what it is, to prioritize it based upon the circumstances that they see and their ability and their capacity, to measure what efficiencies might occur and what costs there might be. So we didn't presume that you are going to be approving things that we're recommending in this report. We're recommending the court and the prosecutor's office look at these things, and then they come to you if there's a funding requirement. So that's why there's really no additional things identified. They'll need to be determined as they are pursued. And this, we received this from the court. I will tell you, we had a meeting this morning. We stopped by the court, had a wonderful tour, spent some time with your court administrator, and I will tell you that the passion that they have, the dedication they have for what they do, the court team, the individuals from your prosecutor's office that we met with, these are dedicated professionals. Many of the things that we are recommending in the report are a direct result of things that they identified. They cared. I got to tell you, Paul told me that even in some of the interviews, staff got emotional about how much they care about what they do. They feel they make a difference, and they do make a significant difference in your community. And please, don't take anything that we've said as indicating that your team is doing a bad job, your judicial branch. As a matter of fact, they're doing an admirable job of improving with the resources and the things that they have available to them. And they care about what they're doing. And we're just happy that we had the opportunity to come in and we had to share our 60 years of experience. We really didn't get into much detail. I got to be honest with you. We just flew at the 80,000 foot level through this. There's a lot of information in that report. What's that, Paul? Oh, I thought maybe he said like 100,000 feet. Flying was a key word. So anyways, we wanted to preserve time for questions. And again, we think there's a lot of good information in the report, and we hope you had the opportunity to look at it. And we are now available for any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. If we start with questions, we will never get to Gina and the judges. So we're going to hear from Gina and the judges, and then we'll open it up.
I can go first real quick. Whatever.
Great.
Want to introduce our new elected judge, Judge Heller. She's been an awesome help implementing the second judicial individual. She's done very well. She's jumped right into it. And this is a slide. It's self-explanatory. We have 15 areas. And I will honestly tell you that we have worked in every area, have made some improvements, except for obviously we will not go into the prosecution's case management system, the building security, that has been worked quite a bit. But every area we've made some improvements. And as a matter of fact, the early resolution of cases today, when I did court, the city attorney's office, they were there with plea agreements. And so we resolved probably 10 cases right out of the box. So honestly, it's been working pretty well. We're all working well together.
And I don't really have much more to say unless Judge Heller wants to say anything else.
No, I don't have anything further. I think that the areas that we're able to implement changes in, that those are being done well, and that the areas that we've not done are being looked at closely, especially considering that some of them require interagency relationship and work, so.
And financial support. So we are gonna
That is
do
all.
what we can with the things, as we've talked, that don't take additional budget.
Okay, thank you, judges. Judge Heller, welcome. Don't go away, we'll have some questions probably, so we'll turn it over to Gina.
I will try to be similarly brief. So as you've heard, there's a ton in that report, and I just wanted to comment on a couple of things because there's so much there. And while there are only a few, 3, 5 recommendations that are specific to the city attorney's office and to the prosecutors, we're really a partner in all of these recommendations, and we are really dedicated and are already working with the court. As Judge Kolar said, we're already doing what we can to help the court implement the recommendations that are specific to them, while we concurrently look at the things that we can do. And so I just made a slide that focuses on the 3 themes of this report, and I personally feel that these 3 really are all very overlapping. What has been mentioned about technology is I think one of the highest priorities. Our case management system does not communicate with the law enforcement records management system. It does not communicate with the courts, full court. It does not communicate with the state e-filing system. I have contacted the state to see about getting an interface with the e-filing system. I have contacted them about getting an interface with the municipal court's full court enterprise system, and those are just not options at this point. So what we are going to do is focus on what we can do at our end with our case management system building out. And I am not the technology person, so I can't really speak to it other than very broad and general terms that we'll see what we can do to broaden our case management system to communicate. Because I think that is one of the hugest inefficiencies that we have. There's a quote in this report somewhere that talks about the justice system review should be conducted to examine the point of origin data entry. Data entry of one agency should feed downstream agencies such that the same information is not entered repeatedly among agencies, and that is what is happening here. Law enforcement inputs the data, then our office, or then the court, sometimes simultaneously our office, we are all inputting the data at different times, and it's just really redundant, and it's very inefficient. So that is something that I think should be one of the biggest priorities for council to consider funding. We certainly are planning that in our, the next few years, that we will be coming to council with funding requests, because that's gonna come from the BPD, the court, our office, somewhere. So the next theme that the report really focused on was the jail capacity, and our office, again, like Judge Kolar just mentioned, we are really focusing on the early resolution of cases. We're having a lot of internal discussions about how to do that and what processes we can implement, and how to get those things going right away, how to get the information soon enough, how to get, plea offers out. It requires a lot of partnerships, though. We, really have to have the public defender's office on board. It has to be a coordinated effort. So and information sharing is also key there. So we're focusing on early resolution of cases. We're focusing on collaborating and coordinating with our criminal justice partners, which includes the county. You know, we've got the sheriff's office, we've got the county attorney's office, as well as BPD and the Office of Public Defender, the courts. There are a lot of agencies that need to coordinate and collaborate to get to look at these inmates, to see who can be released, to determine if there can be an early disposition or a quick disposition of these cases. And then the final theme that was discussed by our consultants today was the enhancing justice and efficiency. And again, our office is doing the parts that we can. We are participating in, there's a working group that's talking about the arraignment center concept. So we're working on resolving some issues there. There's a lot to work out there with, you know, logistics and MOUs or agreements, you know, what kind of legal authority exists, you know, what the costs of such a structure would be, and the cost-benefit analysis, things like that. We're working all that. There's lots of structural questions about how the arraignment court concept will work, and so we really want to dive into that and see how we can help make that work as well. Again, it's a need for cooperation and coordination with a lot of parties, and so we are hopeful that everybody is willing to work together and coordinate with us, you know, defense counsel, and we work, as Judge Kolar said, we work really well with the courts, and we're more than willing to do those things. But I really see that there's an overlap here. The automation and the information sharing, I think, is just really key for all the areas, and I think that needs to be one of the biggest priorities at this point. And BPD is key in that, because they have been looking for a new system, as I understand it. They have been looking for a new system, a new records management system for a couple of years now, and it hasn't happened, and I don't have the details why that is, but the courts, our office, the sheriff's office, the county, you know, we all have to be part of that decision so that this information can talk and can communicate and share. And I think that is going to really help us move forward and really improve our efficiencies. So with that, I don't want to belabor anything else and open it up for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Okay, Council, we've got about 20 minutes before we would traditionally take a break. I don't know if we'll get through any questions that we've got. We're not intending to try to solve all of the problems of the world tonight. This is a bit of a toe in the water. Great report. Thank you. I do encourage you to read it all if you haven't. But questions, I don't know how we would structure this conversation by topic. We're not going to be able to do that. So whatever is on your mind for questions or for commentary, it's all yours, and I'll just recognize whoever wants to be recognized. We have some questions. Councilmember Boyette.
This is a big deal, and staff, we're not going to tell people what to do, but we're going to pay for everything that they're going to do. How do we know, I mean, when is somebody going to come to us theoretically and say, we need some money, and how much we need? We have to start planning for the future for money, not, you know, individual little things, because everybody's going to do their own thing. Does that make sense? We're going to need some help figuring out how much money we need and how we're going to get there.
Yeah, Chris, why don't you start, and then if the judges want to chime in on Gina, then we'll let them.
Agreed. I mean, as a part of our Budget and Finance Committee conversation last week, one of the points the judge appropriately made is this report is now out. We are relocating to our new city hall. We have not, that is the one area, some of the prosecution function and some of the court function. Final hires from the public safety levy will take place in this fiscal year, this proposed fiscal year. And certainly I've made a number of notes here of each place where there's, I'm assuming, a dollar sign, and I don't know the range of that yet, but dollars will be needed. So I think what we need to be sensitive to in this current fiscal year that we're presenting and will adopt over the next 60 to 90 days is what capacity do we give ourselves when we get grounded in the new city hall and we can make these changes and implement them? What cash is needed? Software, I'm not aware of any cheap software, or anytime it's cheap, it's never cheap, and it's almost always a problem. In fact, I could only name 1 or 2 software implementations that the staff would say went well. So the cost of that, as well as other implementation components, my question to the judges and the city attorney's office will be, okay, what kind of dollars, to your point, do we need to be setting aside or preparing for this implementation of components that will cost money? As has been stated, several implementations are happening that don't require additional dollars, but we're going to have to invest additional dollars as well.
Gina?
If I could just say something about that, I think, so it seems to me that it would be great if the consultants have recommended that the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, kind of take on a lead role here. They have a whole list of working groups that, I think they call them working groups, that with different topics that they could tackle. And it seems to me that that would be a great idea if the CJCC would create a smaller working group to address the technology issues. And instead of all of us individual departments coming back and making our requests, we will have hopefully have a lot of meetings to discuss what all of our needs are so that we can coordinate. And instead of me just coming back and saying, I need 30 grand to create these interfaces or to get a new system, and then the BPD doing the same. So if we're all sitting at the table talking about what we need, it seems to me that we could have better coordinated responses and requests for council.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand it to Councilmember Kennedy, but judges, on the budget front, there's a couple FTEs in the public safety mill levy, 2, I believe, in addition to Judge Heller's salary. Are you anticipating, and you may not know at this point, but are you anticipating other budget ask for us in this upcoming budget year?
So I'd like the dust to settle with, like I said, our move and the cost of that and, all the moving parts of a possible short-term detention facility that's in the works. It does affect our court. Arraignment court affects our court. So what I know that we're going to be asking for if we get the arraignment court is we do need an additional staff member for that. But those are all things that are kind of segued into this. We're going to ask for it this year because we don't know when this is going to be up and running, but we need things in place. I understand that this county may be going to have a magistrate. I think that's really important to have one judge that sees all the cases, so you're not having a rotating judge going through and having different ideas. And you need consistency if you're going to do the arraignment court that addresses our district court and our municipal court cases. You need a magistrate, and I understand that the county was thinking about that. We also need the staff individual, and I know I'm kind of getting off of our study, but we need the individual clerk that would be over there listening to arraignment court, getting our documentation, pulling the files, because we can't do it with our staff that we have right now. And I know that sounds like, well, why not? Because we already have staff that comes in at 5:30 and gets ready for jail. And then, so that person's gonna have to get in, get ready, pull the files, because we have gone automated. We have. That's, lots of things we've done that I didn't talk about today, but we've gone automated. So because we're automated, they're not automated over there. So I have a digital docket that we know that we can pull up into our full court, and we can pull it up and say, this is what happened on the last court hearing. But if we don't have somebody bringing that information over and put it into our digital docket, I don't know what happened over there. And so we need that person to do that. And there's going to be a lot of cases running through. So those are the things I would be asking for if this actually went through with the arraignment court. And I've been clear from day one of the things, and I'm not going to speak for the city, but I know they're going to be asking if this happens, they have other staff that they're asking for as well. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm trying to do on the study what doesn't cost us any money next year. Yes, if we're gonna do the automation, if that's gonna come to tuition, somebody, I mean, I just honestly heard, I mean, I understand the text messages, like, you know, people give out for your doctor's appointments and stuff like that. I think that'd be really great. I just heard yesterday that we actually had, somebody had created some sort of program that actually, I think Alternatives is using to let people know when their next court date is. I don't know for sure, but first time I ever heard about it. It'd be nice to know and start using it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, great.
So,
Okay,
thank
very
you.
good. Thank you. Councilmember Kennedy, Councilmember
Judge, before you go,
Roy, Councilmember Gillett, Councilmember
one
Rowan.
quick question.
Yes.
Full court came about 10, 15 years ago?
Full court, when I was a county attorney, that's what we used.
Right.
And this is, it's totally different than what we used to use.
Okay, that has been put together by the state. Is our system from the state system?
Ours is managed by the Supreme Court, yes, put together by the state, and all the courts, district courts, courts of limited jurisdictions, we all use that same programming. We have allowed access, anybody can actually access it through the public portal, but we have allowed access to our city prosecutors that they can go in and see what has happened on any of their cases.
So my question is, has the Supreme Court been approached about getting this program to be integrated with prosecutors, with law enforcement, and all of that?
Yes, that is my answer, yes. And in fact, when we, with the digital docket and different things we've asked for, that's outside of the contract, so it costs more money. So yes, they have been approached, and I think
Okay.
we can still continue to approach them, but yes.
Because that's an ask. We should be going to a legislator and asking them to have the state funding that.
Right, but I don't know if they have the capabilities to actually do that. Go ahead.
Right,
Go ahead.
yeah, Councilmember Kennedy, I did specifically contact, the two separate agencies with the state. The Supreme Court IT division, and I asked for an interface with the full court enterprise. And they said that that is not their focus right now. They are still focusing on simply implementing full court enterprise statewide. And so they basically, well, the quote is, "I cannot entertain an interface to a single court and simply do not have the resources or the directive to pursue such a project." So there's a lot of other, appears to be priorities ahead of that, so it would take some legislative interference, I think, to make that kind of a priority change.
Well, my comment is that the state is sitting on a lot of money in reserves that could be helping, and we should probably, our legislative committee should be talking to some legislators here so we can get the efficiency of our court system. Because the full court process that we went through years ago, that has been funded by the state, and the legislature did allocate the dollars there so we can initially get it going. So, one other thing, Chris, the question I have is on the funding for courts. Through the public safety levy, there was so much money allocated that you had in there for the court system. Has that all been expended out? Or are you planning on some more changes once we get to the new building, that you had some funding left in there to be able to address the rest of the court issues?
So Mayor and Council, Councilmember Kennedy, so first what we did is recognize when the voters said yes, we started collecting the money about a year later. We did not wait that year. We used cash reserve to immediately get moving on the hiring process, which meant we had to front load, use reserve in that capacity. So point being, we levied the full amount the voters said yes to so that we could keep things moving forward. This proposed fiscal year will be the year in which the last or all of the positions will actually, as positions, will be both funded and anticipated to be hired. Because, like I said, the final ones were in city attorney's office and tied to the second full-time judge. And some of those positions won't actually be filled until we move over to the new city hall here this winter. But don't mistake the fact that we levied the full mills that we went off and spent the money somewhere else. We didn't. It was all spent so that we could cover the fact that we were using cash reserve before we actually started catching that mill levy. So under no circumstance will we present a budget that doesn't include all of the FTEs that the voters said yes to, including those in court and in the prosecution function.
And Chris, just Councilmember Kennedy, I think the question was, is there any leftover money? And the answer is no, because we only went out to the voters for those known FTEs.
Correct. So in this case, I think the exception, one of the exceptions we've heard in both budget presentations was for the arraignment court. We weren't preparing for an arraignment court at the time of the public safety levy, but the other positions we were.
Okay, thank you. And Gene, I'll just comment that the Tillotson Conference of City Attorneys coming up in 3 weeks, and this issue of the state Supreme Court's support for the full case software and coordination would be, this would be a prime time to talk with the other city attorneys in 3 weeks, I suppose, about it, because they have the same issues. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Actually, this question is for the judges. And I did notice in the report, it quite often talked about a culture or kind of a mindset of continuous improvement or continuous work at efficiency, and really about building relationships, but also looking more I guess, more expansively or more broadly at peers that can be helpful in understanding, if I understood that right. I just wanted to sort of get your feel for that. Not that I know that you're continuously working at improvement, but how does that sound? I mean, in terms of, if as judges you're very deep in the weeds on the day-to-day management, somebody has to leave work early because of a sick child or something, and that was kind of taken, that burden was kind of alleviated so that you're not only a sitting judge but also less of the administrator. How does that feel? I mean, what does that sound like to you, to have more of that higher level ability to make peer relationships, or to have that broad width to see the court at a different level in terms of continuous improvement? Thank you. I mean, it's a little bit awkward, but thank you.
So if I understand, so continuous peer, we do have that locally, well, statewide, because we go to training twice a year and we see other judges and their problems, and we have breakouts and we discuss what their issues are and how they've accomplished different things, and we add to that as well. But are you saying getting, I mean, I read that part in the report and I'm not quite sure what it's saying, to be honest with you. So what are we talking about?
So just real quick, if on the topic of that particular area, one of the things we just wanted to remind the city about was funding. There are organizations, National Center for State Courts, National Association of Court Management, National Association of Presiding Judges and Court Executive Officers. They offer the opportunity, and frankly, to be honest with you, like I said, there's not that many comparables that you have around the state that have the same circumstances that you have here in Billings. So you may have to go out and collaborate with other court leaders across the nation to learn about how others may be using the same or similar technology to you have. to hear about their challenges, how they're overcoming them. As I mentioned, most of the things that you're experiencing in Billings, most courts around the country are experiencing very similar things. And so, and you can spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to resolve them, or you can let others help you, such as consultants like us, but also reaching out to peers, because they're dealing with the same things across the nation. So funding training opportunities with these, actually they're professional associations. We say they're training, but really they're an opportunity. You know what's more important? Networking. That's where it's when you go to training, half the benefit is the content of the presentation. The other half are the relationships that you make, where you can pick up the phone and say, how are you doing this in your city? That type of thing. So, and then setting time aside and being intentional. I'll leave with this, but I think this is so important. Your team and your judge has been so busy handling cases, it's hard to set time aside. It's hard to think about, okay, let's set time aside to look for these things and to plan. That's why I mentioned, for example, freeing up your administrator from the day-to-day so they can do things like this. So you've given some capacity for that by adding a second judge. It will free your judges up to participate in these things more. And so that's what we talk about, capacity, just being able to set time aside and making sure that if your team is buried in the day-to-day, let's find a way to help them and then set time aside and be intentional and understand and be able to do the job of seeking improvement and implementing it. So I hope that was helpful.
Right, and I guess I did understand that part, but I mean, besides our trainings twice a year, you know, it's been great to have Judge Heller on, because then we have had more time to address different issues and come up with ideas to like resolve. I mean, as far as going to other places, picking up the phone, you know, I have done that in the past. But, you know, it would be nice to be able to go and visit another court, but it also takes money and funding. And we already go to those 2 trainings a year that are mandatory. For us to go to some additional training would be awesome, but we still have a responsibility to this city, and then it entails pro tems, and we do have some pro tem budget that's still in there for vacation or sick time or whatnot. But I mean, that's something that's gonna be, you know, plane tickets and travel, and I would love to look into that, but at this time, I think our budget is kind of tapped with some of the things that we're looking for right now. So that might come in the next couple of years when we're real settled, so.
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Giller, Councilmember Rowan?
Thank you. I guess this is probably just addressed to members of the CJCC. And Chris, maybe you'll be a point person for, but I think thinking strategically and getting the greatest efficacy, I guess, with our limited resources. Like we have not a lot. We have some additional resources that we didn't have last year. I will find out how much. It's not a lot. Given that we have a limited amount of money, where can we do the most with it? And so we have talked in this body about more police officers on the street, but I just wonder, you know, does it make more sense for us to spend resources potentially in some other bottlenecks within the system here? We identified, you know, the opportunity to have early resolution of cases, expanding more jail capacity. When you have more jail capacity, that means there's not as much of the catch and release police liens. So that means there's not as many people the police on the street are having to, you know, arrest again and again and again. It addresses immediately, even before we have the arraignment facility up and running. It addresses police morale as well of having, and so just be thinking this multidisciplinary group, the CJCC, where can we have the most impact in with our limited resources? My concern about if we hire more police officers, we're just hiring more people to be frustrated with the catch and release policing. And so just trying to if it's more resources in other parts of our criminal justice system, let's maybe consider addressing them there.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor. I have just a couple questions. We start with the consultants. I don't know who wants to navigate these, but I'd actually like to hear your answer first to Councilmember Gulick's question. If we only had $1 million, let's say that's what we had, what's the most important thing you would recommend we do?
We discussed this, we knew this question was coming. Jeff and I discussed, it's like, who's get the short straw here? Obviously, you have to weigh in favor of the public safety issue, right? Public safety, safety of the citizens, safety of the community has to rise, and that suggests the jail capacity to some extent. What we tried to build into the report was that if CJCC can really be active and assimilate the groups that have ideas about efficiency, like the software problem that Gina mentioned, there will come a need to fund something like that. So if funding those priorities will produce a certain level of efficiency, it ought to be considered.
Sure.
But you need that activity at the ground level to come up and maybe go through CJCC and have it come forward to say, if we fund this, we expect to have these efficiencies down the line. And then you'll have to make a decision whether you consider that justifiable or not from a funding point of view. And so if it were me, I would wait till some of that flushed up to see that you can have these down the line efficiencies with a little bit of investment here and even ask for that to be measured later. I used to go to city council and ask for funding for a certain project or something, and they would fund it. The next year I would go back and say, this is what happened when you gave me that funding for this project. Here's the results, here's the efficiency, here's how we measured success, and report back. So there's nothing wrong with a little bit of accountability in all of this.
And I understand, I mean, obviously we can work through things, but I'm wondering if something popped out to you guys as very urgent and very high return.
So in addition to what Paul said, I just thought of two things. Number one, the addressing FTAs for an earlier case resolution. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because the efficiencies do help you with how you process the case when you have a case before you. But if you resolve the case earlier, you don't have that case to deal with. And by resolving non-compliance or mitigating it, you're again eliminating a whole bunch of work. So there's this making work efficient when you have it, but if you have an opportunity to eliminate that work, that you have to weigh the pros and cons, the cost and benefit. Like I said, a tenth of a cent to send a text message. Wow, if you can do it quickly and there's low cost, that eliminates a lot of work, a lot of other things. So I would say, weighing the bang for the buck, just as you said, you have to look at these and you'll have to look at the circumstances and have conversations as criminal justice partners about these type of things. But I say resolving cases earlier and lowering FTAs and FTCs. And you lower FTAs and FTCs by just simply focusing on putting on what I call the customer lens. I'm a person who doesn't understand the court system and I just got a ticket for something. Is it easy to understand how to navigate it? Or am I going to be frustrated? I used to be a judge, and one of the things I used to see is a lot of people don't come to court because they're scared. Mm-hmm. So if you make them not scared and they understand the processes, they're more apt to show up, make it as convenient and as easy as possible. The justice is still justice. You're not going weak or mild on things. You're just helping people navigate the system so it doesn't cause you extra work. So focusing on FTAs and FTCs and early, and it sounds like your team is already jumping on that.
So, but I did want to ask you, because the recommendations around early resolutions of cases read to me a little generic. Like, these are just sort of good ideas you should think about. In your review, did you see a significant opportunity for our court specifically, to increase resolution?
Okay, so here I'm going to give you a very tangible example of that. Oftentimes in cases, traditionally in the court system, people make an initial appearance. They enter a plea, and if they enter a plea of not guilty, or sometimes a judge will enter a plea of not guilty for them, and they'll set it for what in our state what we call a pretrial conference. You call it something different here. And sometimes there's a series of appearances. And sometimes, at least it's been in my experience, that sometimes we don't engage as a justice system until somebody says, I'm going to enter a plea of not guilty. Okay, now we'll talk about a public offender. Now we'll get the prosecutor involved. What we experienced in our courts, and we were similar sized, and we were in cities right across the valley from each other. What we experienced is when we, it's the same amount of work whether you do it now or later, we did it earlier. And what that did is that eliminated all those extra conferences in so many cases.
I understand how the recommendation works.
Yeah.
I'm asking, did you see it as a deficiency here, or are you just generally recommending it as a good idea?
In your calendar, and in the number of fail to appears, now, we didn't know exactly why people were failing to appear, if it was for further down the line or up front. But if I remember correctly, I want to say the warrant number was 9,000 cases, and your caseload was around 18,000. That is one of the most significant numbers I have seen in my career for noncompliance. That stood out. And so my thought was, hey, if you have any way to try to not reset cases, Paul has a phrase. He says, every time somebody appears, it's an opportunity to resolve a case. And my phrase through my career has been, every time you reset a matter, it's an opportunity for a person to fail to appear. So do I see it as an opportunity here? Yes. We're already hearing that instead of asking people to come back later, we just heard from the judge saying, hey, in 10 cases today, we were ready with a plea today. Those probably would have been cases that would have been set for another appearance. I do think it sounds like there's significant opportunity in your court system possibly.
So, Mayor, I have, not surprisingly, a number of questions around the arraignment court and the technology concepts, but as I think you guys know, we have a CJCC subcommittee that's working on jail expansion and system efficiencies that's multi-jurisdictional, and we are talking about these very things. Would you be willing to let us ask you as a committee some of those questions rather than taking up time tonight? Are you available maybe to meet with our interdisciplinary group?
I think Paul's, Bill and I, yes.
Okay.
The contract still has some time in it. We're willing to, definitely. And we also did put in the document, we actually kind of have, I guess what we say, some directions or a recipe for, it's called the Criminal Justice Information System Work Group, which would be a subsection of the CJCC that specifically addresses how to address technology opportunities that would feed the CJCC, but we would be happy to elaborate and provide context.
Thank you. Mayor, I have a question for Gina and the judge. Would you like me to do it now or wait until after the break?
Well, Council, what are you thinking about a break? I'm sensing we are not done. So we're either going to have to skip the break and just press ahead or take a break and come back on this topic. Skip the break?
Or at least
Okay.
do the break after.
Okay, all right, and it's a work session. If you need to get up, go, feel free. So Councilman O'Nolan, go ahead.
So I want to ask about this recommendation that we think about how temporary protection orders are being issued. I would guess that your position would be that's best done legislatively, that we be given very clearly the authority to issue a temporary protection order in the field if, in fact, that recommendation is one worth adopting. But I'm curious if you, first of all, think that's worth adopting, having TPOs issued immediately in the field. And second, could we work around it with some sort of, around the current statutory language and still comply with it with some sort of version of the electronic warrants that are being offered? Can we have a streamlined and simplified petition that a police officer could have handy? Can we do a sworn oath over the phone? Could we have a TPO issued immediately without any kind of subsequent court action? Recognizing, of course, legislative clarity is always best. Could we do anything in the interim, in your opinion, and if so, is it worth pursuing? Oh, you could come up here, Judge, sorry.
Yeah, we need you to speak into the mic or it's lost forever.
I don't know if Gina agrees with me or not, but I mean, in order to look at that, I do believe we need to look at the legality of it.
Yeah.
And so I think I can't give you an answer today on that.
That's
Just
fair.
we need to look at it through the legal system and look at the statutes and see issuing, and we're talking a temporary protective
Just the
order.
immediate 20-day.
I mean, if the respondent, not defendant, if they're there and they can actually be served and they haven't run away, like there's a situation, they have to be served and they have a right to have a hearing. So if we did it, I'm just thinking this through.
Yep, that's okay.
So give it to them, they're served, they're there, then they're given a court hearing date. So there's all sorts of things that would have to happen so we could have that hearing in 20 days.
Yeah.
Potentially.
How much do you think it would streamline things if that was just done immediately?
I mean.
Service immediately, issued immediately?
I mean, the thing that would help is the individuals there, the respondents there, so they could be served immediately.
Correct.
That would help, because sometimes we get these order of protections that a person hasn't been served because they're avoiding service. And so then they're not served, and it takes a while until you actually can have the hearing, because the party has to be served before you have the hearing. So that would help.
I would be interested in us having further conversations so that our legislative group can know if that's a priority and what you would think as well about the Family Justice Center's recommendation that we actually automatically issue the 1-year order of protection with the defendant having a right to contest and request a hearing. So I know those are recommendations. They'd all have to be done legislatively. I'd just be interested in your thoughts, particularly if it would streamline things.
Definitely have to have the legislature change that 20, they have a right to have a hearing, can't just issue a year.
Yeah.
And they'd have to have a hearing, so that's something would have to be addressed.
And I think our legislative
Anything
committee
else?
would be interested to hear those recommendations or thoughts.
Anything else on that?
I would just note that ultimately, I mean, per statute, the court is issuing an order.
So Judge, you'll have to say that again into the microphone.
Apologize. So I would just say that statutorily, again, these are things to look at, but it's the court that issues those orders because they're looking at the petitioner's sworn affidavit,
Right.
which is required to be filed by legislation, so.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it would take a lot of legislative work to, I think, change that language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are going into legislative session, so now is the time. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a question for the consultants. I'm not sure who can answer this or not, but in the research or when you looked at this, the whole idea is the court systems here, especially the municipality side, we're dealing with lower offenders, or typical resident who made a mistake and has to appear before the court for one reason or another. And so, and I may be oversimplifying that, but the idea is, have you seen in other cities or in this during your research here that either a weekend or night type court setting would allow the residents to participate better and easier within the system?
Working at the City Mesa Court, that issue came up several times about the option for night court or those kinds of things. The costs associated with that tended to defeat it. So when you talked about security, staffing, everything that's needed to spin up a court to run for a few hours, they just didn't think it was practically, financially feasible to do it. So it was not done on that basis.
Okay, so as far as the public's concerned, it wasn't really necessary for that? Is that what you're saying? Or it's just that it was too expensive?
The court, extra hours, evening or weekends or something, the budget costs associated with that extra time running in the court, it didn't seem feasible to the city councils that considered it, that I worked for. So
Some municipalities, by the way, in the alternative have focused on opportunities to resolve your case without having to make a physical appearance. The ability to, even in Arizona, we had the ability in misdemeanor cases for people to appear remotely and to fill out an affidavit, and we could take a plea, for example, by phone or by video, and they never even had to appear. So these are some of the, I think what's driven, that was something that was really popular when there were no other remote options, but nowadays with the ability to transmit information and appear remotely, I think the focus is trying to make things accessible 24/7 from any location on any device, being able to exercise opportunities remotely. Probably won't see that in the felony world, but we've seen some movement on that in the misdemeanor world to try to promote access after hours.
Okay, and then I had another follow-up question on kind of what Councilmember Owen talked about on this early settlement of cases and things like that. And I think that's a great idea. I think it's great, the fewer touch points, you're going to move through the system, it's more efficient. But I guess the question I have is when you have some of these early resolutions, can they go awry? I mean, is there any tracking of these early plea deals or things like that that maybe they're being taken advantage of by plaintiffs or the criminals, whatever it may be, to where we're not tracking that they're just kind of skirt through the system, we're just putting criminals back on the street to commit crimes?
Yeah, ultimately, you really want to do that with some effective result relevant to the defendant. You don't want repeat offenders and so on and so forth. So even though you might settle that case early or even at initial appearance, it doesn't mean it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card. There may be counseling requirements, there may be other requirements related to that case that's simply occurring sooner in the process. And you still have the same measurement of success. Is there repeat offenders? Is this working? Is it not working? And so on. And so it's the same measure that you would apply if you settle that case later under the same sentencing requirements. So we're just suggesting let's settle it earlier and not have so much involvement to necessarily get to the same result.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Counselor, we're about an hour and 40 minutes into this one, so I'm thinking we should wrap up. No one's jumping up their hand. Chris, if I can use this to do a wrap up, the biggest danger with these studies, of course, is they go on the shelf, and that's where the dust lies. So we did not see that with CPSM. We had kind of regular reports coming back by both the police chief and the fire chief. I'm assuming, but I think it's important that we state this, that there'll be a follow-up process here. I guess what I would hope that Gina, the judges, our own IT department, to the extent they're involved, maybe even the CJCC, be asked to come back to us with the 3 Ps. What are the priorities? Can't do everything. And ideally, this would be in their own little written analysis of the report, right? So that we have something to look back at, but what are their priorities? 2, what's their progress on making progress toward those priorities? Timelines, because there are lots of competing needs, obviously. And then P, the pay. What's it going to cost? Who's paying? Because it always comes down to money, right? So are we going to get, can you give us some assurance that you'll at least be pushing for those kind of periodic reports in written and hopefully oral at this meeting so the public can hear as well?
Absolutely, the work that
the judge will give her a chance to comment as well, of course.
For sure.
So we got the report, we started working on things, and I understand people are worried about this sitting on the shelf and nothing happening. Already things are happening, and constantly, I'm just gonna be frank, coming back and reporting. If you guys have questions, just email us and see what we're doing. If there's some priorities, we're gonna take and do those priorities, and we're working on it. And I get that you guys wanna have the reports of this and stuff, but you gotta trust us, we're doing this. And it's like, I don't know what all the council, what they think about it, I'd love to hear, but I assure you that the city is working on this, we already are. And, coming back, the 3 Ps and the pay, if we were gonna ask for something that's gonna cost a lot of money, of course, we're gonna come back to you guys and ask you for that. And we've kind of already alluded, the technology is gonna cost some money. The arraignment court is gonna cost some money, that we're asking for. The other stuff, I don't know if there's some high dollar stuff, but I don't know if I made any sense, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us and talk to us. I don't think it has to be a formal report is what I'm saying. We're inundated with meetings and reports, and I know that's part of our job, but trust us. Trust us that we are doing this, and we already are. Like I said, we've already gone through, of these 15 things, we've already addressed several of those things already, and we're already doing that. So is everything gonna be done in this report? I'm gonna tell you probably not necessarily, because some of them are very good ideas, but it's a recommendation, and so we're using the things that are gonna make our court more successful, if that makes sense. Any questions after I said that?
Okay, very good. Thanks. Chris, you want to comment on that subject further? And we'll wrap up.
As Judge Kolar said, they have leaned in, as well as the city attorney's office. That being said, at the highest level, you know this, I know this, we have a city charter. Our city charter has a hard mill cap in it. We don't even get to grow our revenue by 1/2 the inflation rate on a 3-year rolling average. What does all that mean? We will probably need to be back in front of the voters there's no question, at some time, as I've tried to state in my 5-6 year tenure with you, Our community has set up a system where we need to go to the citizens and ask them if they want to be making additional investments in a variety of areas at operating our city. In order to do that, I'm certain the voters are going to want to know, you paid for a CPSM report back in 2020. You paid for this report in 2024. I'm about to sign a contract. I need to talk with you guys to make sure I've got the affirmative, but to do the update to the CPSM in this current fiscal year rather than wait another 90 days. And our citizens want to know what we've done with that information. And it's not that we implement every single item, but I think we have to answer to anything we don't implement, why we don't implement it, and what we did and how it worked. So, though without a question, I'll speak in support of the staff's concern and the judge's concern about spending a disproportionate amount of time reporting versus doing things and getting things done. But I think there has to be a balance of both. We have to be able to report to you and ultimately the taxpayers as to what we've done with this information, because frankly, we need them to trust us and have confidence of what we're doing so that they will support us, because ultimately someone whispered out a number of software that I think was off by at least a zero or maybe some zeros and commas. There aren't any software programs that are just tens of thousands of dollars. So we don't have what I suspect ultimately to be really a best practice implementation of some of these things that we're going to need to make tough decisions, either cutting programs and not doing them anymore as a city, or going back to our taxpayers and asking for those investments. So yes, we will report back. I don't know what the regular basis, at a minimum on the police and fire side, we've said semi-annual. I mean, I've got the annual report from the police department draft this morning. That is inclusive of reporting back, and we've got at least twice a year we're doing that. So I would anticipate the same implementation, with the grace and recognition that this fall an awful lot is going on moving into the new city hall. We're just 4 months into a second judge, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you, judges. Thank you, CGL. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, CJCC, everybody who worked on that, Councilmember Owen. We're not done, but we've got a good start here, so much appreciated. I know I learned a lot reading that report. So is there any public comment on this item, item number 2? If so, come to the podium. No one is coming to the podium, so I guess we'll close public comment on that item and move on to item 3. Council, feel free to take a break if you need to, but we'll just press ahead. Thank you, everybody. Feel free to see yourself out, I guess. And we'll turn it over to our zoning coordinator, Nicole Cromwell, to tell us what the legislature has told us we need to do.
I'll let the room clear a little bit. So in 2023, as I'm sure you all are aware, the legislature in Montana took up a lot of land use issues during their session. Several bills passed that do affect local land use regulations and procedures. One of those is Senate Bill 245, which allows by right multi-unit developments in all commercial and mixed-use zones and restricts the requirement for off-street parking for that use. There are 2 other bills, Senate Bill 323 and 528, which have been granted a restraining order due to a lawsuit filed in the 18th Judicial District Court in Gallatin County. That court case is ongoing, but the restraining order prevents cities that have not already adopted changes based on those 2 bills from adopting changes that are required by those 2 bills. So this one is only about the allowance for multi-unit development. All right.
maybe not there. So what is really the intent of that legislative change? It was to open up more property within cities of 5,000 or more, property that could be or could have mixed residential uses, apartments, townhomes, mixed-use buildings. And prior to our code amendment in 2021, most of our mixed-use and commercial zone districts did allow multifamily development by right. When we did our code amendment, we said, okay, in these districts, the mixed-use and commercial districts, we're going to allow multifamily uses, but it can't be throughout the whole building. You'd have to have some ground floor commercial space. What this legislation does says you can't do that. You have to allow a fully multi-unit building. You can't have these like caveats for that use. It also basically says that you can't require more than one off-street parking space for each unit in a multifamily development or multi-unit development in those districts. The state law was effective immediately when it was signed by the governor, and curiously, it applies retroactively. In other words, any local zoning that was adopted prior to this amendment to state law is also affected by this state law. So we do need to provide local conformance with the state law. Oops, went too fast. So the draft, which was initiated by the Zoning Commission on April 2nd, it doesn't mean that they approved of the draft or any such thing. It just said, yes, let's initiate the process, the public process to review this draft. So the draft makes several revisions in our code, starting out with some of the district descriptions in the commercial and mixed-use zone district category of 27,400 and the East Billings Urban Renewal District of 27,900. So that's just taking words out or substituting words within those district descriptions. So it's clear that you can have a residential use on any floor in the building. The second part is to amend our use table of 27,1000 to replace our PL designation, which is it's an allowed use but has location limits, with a P instead. And include a new category of multi-unit development as a 5-unit configuration, because the state law specifically says that multi-unit development means at least five attached units in a structure. So we had to create a special line for that. So that's why that's in there. And then we also had to revise the use standards section for household living, which referred people for doing residential uses in commercial zone districts, where it talks about being on the upper floor, behind the front, non-residential use. So we just basically struck one of the paragraphs out of that section. And finally, we looked at revising the off-street parking code and only applying it to commercial and mixed-use zone districts, but then it doesn't make sense, and it would be hard to administer a code that has two different off-street parking requirements for the same use, but just in different districts. So what we're proposing is to make that code change apply to all multi-family developments or multi-unit developments across all zone districts where it's allowed, to make it one off-street parking space for each residential unit, whether it's in a multifamily or mixed residential district or in a mixed-use or commercial district. We didn't draft anything in there to allow residential uses in industrial districts. not at all, because that's not what the state law requires. So those are still kind of off limits for permanent household residential uses. They still would be open to other types of living arrangements that are not, permanent households, but it's not included in here. Our current code off-street parking for multifamily developments is 1.5 spaces for each unit, and then 1 space for every 10 units as a guest or overflow parking requirement. In some cases, it also has a restriction on if you are quote-unquote assigned a parking space. In other words, you're in a multifamily building and maybe your unit came with a tuck-under garage. That's considered assigned parking, and you can't count it as part of your off-street parking requirement. Or if surface spaces are assigned, like say they're under a carport, and your apartment 4B, and you have an assigned space that's 4B, that also can drive that off-street parking requirement up. We actually had a variance that was applied for by a multifamily apartment builder because taking all of those restrictions put his parking number required up to close to 2 spaces for each apartment, which is well above the industry or market average of about 1.6. Some developers provide that. Some are lower than 1.6, some are a little higher, but most of the time the market and the developer of the multifamily unit understands the demands from their future tenants. So the minimum of 1 per dwelling unit is a floor. You don't have to turn down the dial on your off-street parking if you want to provide more, and most will provide more. It's just making it uniform across the type of use. So that's kind of a overview. I wanted to get you guys involved early so that when it comes to you at the end of May, after the zoning commission hearing on the 7th, that this isn't a surprise. And to give you an opportunity to have some questions to me or information you want included in the draft.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. So questions for Nicole, Councilmember Ripsis, Councilmember Gillick, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, I'm looking at the chart, section 271002, uses by district, and I'm trying to understand why 5 to 8 dwelling units and 9+ dwelling units are not permitted in neighborhood office and neighborhood mixed use. I thought they were going to be required to be permitted everywhere.
The multi-unit development floor in the legislation is 5. We currently don't allow those configurations of more than the unit count of 4 in neighborhood office. So 4 units in a structure is the maximum currently. So we added that row in the table of 5 units because neighborhood office is a kind of a mixed use zone. So we said, okay, instead of just 4, you could have 5 in a structure in a neighborhood office zone.
But I thought
In the
that was
neighborhood
a
mixed-
floor. That's a floor, right? So the state didn't say you have to allow 6, 7, 8?
No,
They said only 5.
5 is the definition of a multi-unit development. So it's actually a good number to use because when you're working in building codes, a 4-unit building has different building codes that apply and requirements than a 5-unit building. So a 5-unit building really takes you from the quote-unquote residential use to a multi-unit use.
And Nicole, I apologize for interrupting, but I stumbled on this myself. The definition of a multiple unit dwelling in the statute means a building designed for 5 or more dwelling units.
So 5 is the floor. the
The
minimum number.
smallest one.
Yes. So that's why in neighborhood office, the floor, the maximum that we have is 4. So we just need to bring that up 1 to meet the floor requirement of the definition. Do you understand? We don't have to allow 12 plexes or 16 plexes in a neighborhood office zone. Why would we? It really doesn't fit with that zone district description and how we've tried to fit that into our overall zoning plan for the city. So the neighborhood office can have a floor or have maximum of 5, which is now the floor for the state law. The other districts that were intended to have more intense uses, to have more mixed uses, can go up from that floor of 5 to include 8-unit buildings or even unlimited number of units in a building. So we didn't just say 5 or more everywhere at any time. We kind of wanted to tailor this to our existing zoning district assembly.
So I guess I just didn't interpret that as the intent of what the legislature was trying to do there. But maybe that's my own confusion. I interpreted what the legislature was doing to say multi-unit is multi-unit, and you city shouldn't be saying that you can have 5, but only 5. I interpreted 5 or more to mean 5 or more in any commercial or retail district.
Right. So, but we get to decide what our districts are described as. And the city gets to decide where they best fit in our zoning plan. Neighborhood office is not intended to be acres and acres of land. Neighborhood office is intended to fit within neighborhoods, like the doctor's office on the street corner at, 10th and Alderson. That's where it's supposed to fit. So if you want to do multifamily or multi-unit development, you wouldn't choose a neighborhood office automatically to do that. What you would choose would be a more intense district or a mixed residential district like NX1 or NX2 to do that kind of development. So it's not preventing that from happening. It's just saying that we want to tailor this use based on our own districts.
Councilmember Gulick-Anise?
Thank you, Mayor. First, a comment. I, in general, am supportive of this. I mean, I know we're required to do it because of SB 245, but I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of lowering the required number of off-street parking. Ultimately, I'd like to see us move to 0. And so I'll be working, I hope, with others, staff and council on that. The question is, because of SB 245, we've had to allow residential units on the first floor of mixed-use buildings, which we haven't in the past. We have, I think, in the eBird zoning, for instance, and I don't recall if that's also been put over into the CBD zoning as well. It doesn't allow residential on the first floor, and I think there's good reasons for walkability. We have a residential unit just right on a sidewalk. I mean, we see this in older neighborhoods where grocery stores were converted into apartments and they're just blinds are down all the time, and doesn't make it for a good walking environment, doesn't make it for a good living environment. But we do see also in downtown buildings, for instance, the need for residential, for retail is not as great as it once was, and the need for residential is great. And so actually having units in back in the alley be residential is great. So this would facilitate that. I wonder, is there a mechanism for us as a city to strongly recommend, they can't require, that units that are on the sidewalk, those spaces not be residential, I guess, do we have any sort of mechanism to communicate that?
Well, I think it would be difficult to make a residential space, given the other building ground floor facade requirements. So, for example, we're not changing those based on the use in the building. So whatever use is on the ground floor in a, like say, a corridor mixed-use 1 zone district, will have to have 65% of the ground floor between 2 feet and 8 feet in windows and doors. So that's going to be a wide open living space. That'll be a lot of energy conservation you're going to have to think about for that use in that building. So I think that those standards, since they're not changing, will still encourage people to put the residential use behind the front facade on the ground floor. This is, so really what we're doing is we're just saying, okay, we're going to open up our commercial and mixed-use zones to allow this to be throughout a building. And so there may be some cases, and I recognize there are a couple of places already that we had a lot of discussions with the owner and the developer about doing a fully residential building in a mixed-use zone that literally had no street frontage. All it had were 3 flags of the parcel that went out to the public street that were about 40 to 50 feet wide. There was never going to be a building that faced that street frontage, that public street frontage. So that building really had no utility to create a street front, to create the public realm against the sidewalk. So I think there's probably more parcels like that in the city that could be, fully used for residential purposes, given the type and location of the lot. So I think we're not giving up anything about, requiring those ground floor standards to still be met. But we're just kind of relaxing that use restriction a little bit.
Okay, Councilor Rennies?
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, since you brought that up, I'll ask this first because you mentioned that you're not going to relax any of those standards in those zones, but if the intent of the legislator was to allow residential on that first floor everywhere, and that requirement is kind of is preventing that, do you think that they will come back and say, hey, listen, you can't have that type of design code when you're doing residential? Is that?
Well, they could, except we've also built into our code the administrative relief tool that says that you can come to staff and ask for a relief from some of these facade elements to a certain point. Beyond that point, you'd have to go to the Board of Adjustment to get further relief. Now, for facade elements, for that ground floor door and window, for administrative relief, you can get up to 25% reduction in that requirement. So even though the standard is still in place, and if they want to meet it, that's great, but they can come to us and say, hey, I want a 25% reduction, and here is why. And one of those reasons could be, I can't get into energy code compliance with this much window and door on the ground floor for this residential unit. So we could certainly consider that.
I see. Okay, thank you. The question I had was on the number of units for parking. You've got it was 1.5. And why did the city use 1.5? Because I think earlier you said the best practice was 1.6.
Well, the city used 1.5 at the time when we were rebuilding the zoning code because off-street parking wasn't in the zoning code. It was in site development code. And it was based on a table that was decades old, like from 1967 or older, which had never been changed. So the idea was that it's going to come into the zoning code before we based the number of parking spaces on the number of bedrooms, which, you know, I mean, you could have 3-bedroom unit, and then you're required to have 1 space per bedroom, or if you have a studio, it's 1, so a 1-bedroom. So there was a lot of calculation involved, so we just came to this resolution between the staff and our consultant, and bringing it to you for approval of 1.5 seems to be a good measure, an average across all types of multifamily apartments, whether they're studios or 3 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms, that 1.5 should be able to meet all of their off-street parking needs. And then engineering added the caveats about assigned parking, added on the 1 for every 10 units, that's guest parking. And that was based on some recent experiences with multifamily developments that were not particularly well designed, that created overflow onto adjacent properties, onto vacant properties, where people were parking on dirt, creating problems. And so it was that recent experience that informed those extra requirements. But it's been my experience in the last 3 years is that most developers of multifamily uses under this code don't have a problem deciding for themselves how many parking spaces their tenants are going to want or need.
Okay, so you don't see this changing, what the builders are going to continue to develop, is they're probably still going to be at 1.5 or anyway. What about developments that you mentioned that were issues like that are out there? Could there be a development out there with a large parking lot that decides, you know what, now I can count my parking spots, I don't need them all, and I'm going to build another unit here, and then it's going to be forcing, is that potentially a problem within the city?
Well, similar to the old style of commercial development, the big building at the back in front of a sea of parking, and they don't need all that parking. Developing outlots or development lots, carving those out of existing parking lots, that could happen. But they would still have to meet whatever off-street parking code is in place at the time. Most developers of multifamily units don't want to have unhappy tenants because they can't find a place to park.
Right. And one last question I had was on, going back to the NO zoning, when that was first developed, it was developed so that you could do a 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 or 4 unit. And that was, really the intent was, when we did that, to do up to 4 units and no more. But it sounds to me like now this change in what is happening in 245, or is that 245, 254? Yes. Yeah, 245. Is now we're actually taking advantage of that and adding 1 more unit to NO, which was never intended when we went through all the recode process. So why are we going to add 1 more unit on the NO when it's not required by this statute? It is required by the statute that they have to do multi. Okay, then I understand it then. Thank you. If it's required, then for NO, I thought for some reason you said NO wasn't necessarily the commercial, then it didn't apply, but I could be misheard you.
Well, it's more of a mixed use, just in the description of the district. So we didn't add 6, 7, or 8, or 9 plus, because that's not really the intent of the district. You can do a modest sized structure that has 5 dwelling units in it that wouldn't look out of place in a neighborhood office zone.
Okay, but it's required that we have to have 5 in neighborhood office, but no more.
No more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Council, we still have to move on to Lampman Park. Anything else for Nicole? You will see this again.
Yes.
And if you've got questions between now and when you see it, maybe shoot you an email or make a phone call.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Always available.
Anything else for Nicole before we move on? Okay, I don't see anything, so we will ask if there's any public comment. On item number 3? No? Okay, so we'll conclude our public comment period on item number 3. Move on to item number 4, disposal of Lampman Park. Mike Pigg, our Parks Director, is our presenter this evening.
Good evening. So I've been asked by a number of council members over the year to kind of come up with alternative funding sources for parks. And so it came to my mind of Lampman Park. Now, this isn't a new theory or a new thought. It's been brought before council a number of times and never really materialized for reasons I could never really figure out why. The neighborhood has been surveyed and they were all in favor of not developing Lampman Park into a park. So, because they don't like the SID or putting a PMD over the top of it. I have a straw survey that came out and it was like 90% of the residents didn't like that idea. So I came up with an idea of maybe seeing what Lampman Park could do. And so there's Lampman Park. Those who don't know, it's off of Monad, about 32nd. So I went out and I got NAI to do an assessment of the value of what that parkland would be. They came back with this is their numbers that they came back with, 1.72 million for the square footage of what they say Lampman is worth. So with that, I thought, well, this would be a great time to use those funds then to finish out Centennial Park or do more development over there. The reason for that is it's the next closest park to them. So Stewart Park is right over there. You can see where it is on the map. And then Centennial would be the most user-friendly community park close by. So then I went to the master plan, pulled up some of the amenities that we have yet to develop there. So the trail through the dog park, it doesn't have a playground. There's no shelters, no picnic shelter, multi-use courts, or a splash pad. So we pulled some numbers off of some projects that we've been doing. So the trail through the dog park, we got a square footage number for that. The playground, comparing that to like Castle Rock Park, that's what we just put in there. Shelters, we just put a new shelter at Terry Park. That was a smaller shelter for about $30,000. A large picnic shelter we did down at Optimus Park for the $150,000 range. Multi-use courts, that comes from the Centennial Park courts. That's about the value that, if you did to a smaller scale, that would be. And a splash pad, still we're guessing at $1 million. So those are some of the ideas that we had to come up with to utilize those funds from the sale of Lampman Park that could go towards developing out Centennial.
And Mike, sorry to interrupt, but this doesn't have a total on it, but when I did the total, it was $2.25 million.
Right. I'm not proposing all of these projects. I'm saying these are some of the projects that have yet to be completed at Centennial Park. Yes. So I didn't total it because I wasn't going that way. And so that's really actually all I had that was my idea, was to come forward and see what council's appetite was for something like this before pursuing it any further.
Okay, Councilmember Kennedy.
I think this is a great idea and it should have been sold years ago and let it be developed. So this is great. I think you should go through the inventory of the rest of the parks that we have around. And we should start looking at all of that and go to the nearest parks that you can do some things and develop them. So I think it's a great idea. I think you should go forward.
Okay, further comments? Councilmember Gillett, Councilmember Shaw?
Yeah, I think it's also a good idea. I think in my mind, the question will be for us as a city to figure out what kind of zoning we have for the Lampman property there. And, I certainly would be supportive of something that does have a small mix of uses that would allow for amenity for the neighborhood. We've got Fox Meadows nearby that's multifamily, so having some more of that with a mix of uses, I think could be good. And I think how we zone it actually will also have an impact on the cost, the price we can fetch for the property as well. So I don't know when we would determine that in the whole process. That would be my question in my mind, but I am supportive of the idea too. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, the NAI not appraisal, but valuation assumed a zone change to multifamily. Yep. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. I just had a question. In our staff packet, it mentioned a upcoming proposal from Homefront for this land. Do you have any idea of the timeline of when they might come and ask the city something official?
Yeah, so I talked to Patty about that, and she said she was bringing forward a proposal, and I know Chris has had a meeting with her, so that, I don't really know the details. Chris may have more.
Mayor and Council, Councilmember Shaw, I did meet with Patty, not this past Friday, about 10 days ago Friday. And it is their intent to submit a proposal. That's been in the discussion stages. I mean, this piece of property, to the comment about assessing or identifying parkland, this is one of several parcels that was identified well before my tenure, 10, 12 years ago, been out at our website available for interest, and Homefront has talked about, and I think it is certainly their intent to put a proposal in, but that's where that stands.
Thank you. I guess my comment would be, I also think in general, it's a good idea. I'd like to finish some parks or at least make progress on some of them. This is just an empty field that's sitting there, but certainly I would like to see what that is so we know all the options before we pull the trigger and say, okay, just sell it.
Correct.
My only caveat, yeah.
Mike, speaking of seeing all options, my recollection of the straw poll process 9 years ago or whatever it was, I was at all those meetings. I chaired the committee that looked at various parcels that could potentially be sold, this being the most valuable of them. The price has gone up, the value has gone up significantly since then. Was not really that they didn't want to see it developed as a park. It was that they did want to see it developed as a park, they just didn't want to pay for it. They wanted somebody else to pay for it, and their preference was for it to be a park. And the city staff wanted it as a park, because we still have a great need, especially then, before Centennial was improved, for informal soccer practice fields, things like that. There's still a need for parks, of course. But they didn't want to pay for it, and they didn't want to see it sold either. So I'm thinking maybe we should go back and try to find that, to the extent there's data, and distribute that to the council to the extent there's something to be distributed for that history. But because that was a long time ago, and because there's new people who have moved in, and people's recollection of that will be different, I'm concerned about moving ahead without giving the neighborhood an opportunity to formally say they would pay to develop a park. I don't think they will, but I would encourage staff to think about what the likely area for an SID would be, and how we would potentially educate that group of what was going to happen. 10 years ago, it was kind of theoretical. This is not theoretical. This is the real deal. And we would have to communicate that to them and tell them it's either going to get sold, if that's what the council wants, or you're going to have to pay to develop a park, and tell them what they would have to do in the latter case. I suppose they would need to sign a petition clearly stating owner of plot or lot ABC, supports an SID. I don't think they would get to 50%, for example, but I think we should think about the extent to what we go to the neighbors to ask them and give them that chance. But it's got to be clear cut, crystal clear, yay or nay, if we did something like that. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. We're always talking about transparency. I think that'd be 9 years ago. That's a lifetime. I think it ought to be proper that we let the people in the surrounding areas say, this is it, folks. We're going to sell this, or you're going to develop it, one or the other. But I think we should at least, after 9 years, give the residents in that area that opportunity. Because ultimately, we wanted this to be a park to start with. If it ends up a park, we got what we wanted.
Councilmember Neese, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's what the question I had was about this park is a straw poll, and I sure would like to see the data on that. And if it was old, I think we need to, like you mentioned, we need to really figure out what it's going to be. I think without spending a whole lot of time, I think, Mike, you had some good cost estimates, if an idea of what that park would cost to develop, and say, residents, this is what you want, it's going to add X number of dollars every year to your taxes. Do you want to do it that? If they don't, then I'm all for selling it and moving on with it. But it is something I think we need to go to the residents, find out what that SID area is going to be before we actually sell it, and give a rough estimate of what that park is going to cost. And I'm assuming they're going to maintain it. It would be a neighborhood park, and so they'd be also assessing the fee to be maintained as well. So what that maintenance fee, estimated maintenance fee would be as well. So thank you.
Councilor Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, a resident did call me, a constituent called me and said, when are you ever going to make that into a park down in yes. I think that's very, very important. I would just add kind of a technical question. When you're forming and putting together an SID, not very far from there are some very large commercial properties. Do they get captured in that maintenance for a park? Or when you create an SID, if there are commercial properties close to that, are they excluded from the cost for an SID for a park? I guess I'm asking that question.
Yeah, Councilman Joy, that's a question I can't answer. I don't know. I do know that there's no commercial properties in any of our PMDs, so I don't know, or any that I know of, so, but I'd have to look into that further.
Thank you, Director Pig. Am I mistaken that an SID would be large enough to actually reach to 24th Street? 24th Street definitely has commercial properties that, if they were assessed in SID, they would help support what could be developed as a park. Or am I wrong? Have I got the wrong location? Maybe I have the wrong location. Okay. I'm just saying, I've never thought about that question. And when you have a park, you have land that's closer to commercial properties. I mean, it seems like they should be a part of paying those costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's about 31st or so it'd be about 7 blocks or so. Councilor Boyette and Chris?
So I was wondering, Director Pig, as long as you're gathering information, if there is a district, can you give us some dimensions of what areas you're talking about?
Correct, yes.
Chris?
Which is actually why we pulled up the Google map or GIS map. I'm not sure which one this is, but there will need to be a boundary drawn. I would suggest at this level, it's not, we don't take the time to make it overly precise, but there should be a range of what it is, because that's what's going to determine what the cost is per property, and it's the cost per property that is going to affect people's decision-making, I think, the most, as to whether they say yes or no. So I think some of that preliminary work. Other one is I'm speculating, but maybe Mike, in this area being a little bit older developed area in town, I don't know if we have waivers of right to protest SIDs. My guess is we probably do not. Do you know that?
No, I don't know. It seemed like from the research from the first straw poll, that wasn't the case, so they could still protest that.
So that'll just be a part of what we'll need to report out on, that ultimately, no matter what we want to do, there will be a component where that I would anticipate that we wouldn't have more than 50% of where we would draw the boundary that have waived the right. So they wouldn't need to literally be willing partners to do that, or they will protest it at whatever the will of the council is to do the park. We won't be able to do it if they protest out, which is the ultimate saying of, no, we're not going to put a park here, go ahead and sell it off. But there's a lot of work that would go into all of that if we go all the way to the final steps.
A lot of work and potentially cost and mailings and other things. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that staff go down this path without giving it thought as to what those costs and staff time and whatever, but just want to raise that as an area for investigation, I guess. Councilor Ripsis and Councilor Bernice?
Just real quick to Councilmember Joy's point, Olympic Park subdivision would just be west of 32nd there. It doesn't appear that the commercial properties at the corner of King and 32nd are included in that, are paying that park maintenance district. So it's very possible that this new Lampman SID could extend all the way to King and get some benefit there as well. Just if I'm looking at the tax statements correctly. I just really wanted to stress a little background. Homefront actually came to the Parks Board 3 or 4 years ago. Mike will probably remember this, and talked about this idea of developing Lampman Park as not just a housing complex, but a complex that had a lot of services embedded with it. So think daycare or other services that might be relevant to their clientele. Right there on Lampman as part of a kind of full-service campus, if you will. They were deterred from bringing that, they were encouraged by the Parks Board at the time, but deterred by other factors from bringing that proposal to council at that time. I think it's going to be important for us to hear that. I think there is, obviously a very strong need in this community for affordable housing. It's in an area where those houses, the single-family houses in that subdivision there, I think in relative terms of our community, are more on the affordable side than certainly a lot of more newer developments. So it's something that would fit there and be a good service to that community. Big Sky Elementary School is actually a Title I school, I think, now. So it's something that fits right in the neighborhood. So I would like to hear from Lampman, from Homefront. I'd like to give them an opportunity to bring forward their proposal and tell us more about that. It's really kind of as opposed to having no good options, which a lot of time we do, we've got multiple good options here. There are lots of good ways this could go, whether it develops as a park through an SID in the neighborhood, whether it's sold and we use the funds to help develop Centennial, or Homefront gets an opportunity here. I will say as well, we do have an opportunity. You'll remember that United Way received a $2 million grant from the Bezos Foundation. And they are looking to do things related to homelessness and specifically families experiencing homelessness. And so that, I think, plays into the type of proposal that Homefront was talking about. And if we do have this opportunity to leverage those Bezos Foundation $2 million into something like really great for that part of the neighborhood, I think it behooves us to at least take a good listen to Homefront and consider what they're bringing forward. So as much as I would love to have $1 million or $1.5 million maybe to go to Centennial Park, I do want to encourage us to look at all the options out there, because like I said, I think there are 3 very good ones. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Yeah, maybe Homefront could build on half of it and pay to build a park for all the neighbors on the other half that everybody could use. I do remember 15 years ago, that intersection was was determined to be the highest, the most densely populated square mile in the state of Montana. Which we don't think of, but there's so many 8-plexes and 4-plexes and townhomes all through that area. The most densely populated square mile in the state of Montana. Councilor Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. Gina, this is a question for you, because we passed this new ordinance about selling a property, and so we're having a discussion here about selling property. Was this property required to be noticed that on site that we're talking about selling it now, or is it later on when? Because I know we talked about the notice, we want to make sure the public was aware of that. And so I'm wondering if we're supposed to be noticed, and if we did notice it.
Councilmember Bernice, I don't think that the notice that you're referring to in the ordinance is required for tonight. This is more of, since it's a work session, you're not taking any of that action that's contemplated under that city code section or that ordinance. So I think this is just to get direction, and then if you sort of give the go-ahead, staff would then do the
publication of the notice as well as the physical notice on the property.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And then the last thing I want to say is, Mayor, thank you for bringing this up. I don't want to direct the staff to spend a lot of money to notify them. So I think there's other ways. I don't know if there's a task force that has this area, or there's HOAs or other social media. There's new things they're called neighborhoods now. And I don't know if the city is looking into that, but it kind of has a parcel of neighborhoods you can kind of email out to all those people or notice. So those are the kind of things I think somehow, but it's something we do need to make sure the residents are aware of and before we sell it.
Okay, very good. Anything else on this item? Okay, we'll open for public comment. Is there anybody who'd like to comment on this item?
Good evening, Mayor Cole and council members. Steve Simonson, Billings Association of Realtors. So it's interesting that I had a discussion on this with Trust Montana about a community land trust being a possibility for this site. This would involve a land lease instead of an outright purchase, but it would certainly return a fair investment back to the city of Billings, the school districts, and the county, and property taxes. Just roughing out 5 homes per acre, you could probably get 30 smaller homes on that site, and without any design plans, I'm just suggesting that that might be the highest and best use for that property. It would also be consistent with the resolution for infill that you've adopted, and also the workforce housing plan. It would also, I think there's been some discussion within council about what is your role in workforce and affordable housing, and it would be an interesting partnership to explore. And so I would encourage, if it does go up for sale or a ground lease situation, that an auction take place or some sort of public process being noticed. This was actually one of the parcels that we were going to look at in August with the consultants coming out for the National Association of Realtors study. So I don't know that there's anything real time sensitive to getting things rolling at this point in time, but certainly some exploratory work could be done, and we would love to be involved with that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. You give us $10 million, you have it tomorrow.
Sounds like a deal.
Okay. All right, any other public comment on this item? Any other public comment? No question by Councilmember Tidswell, I'm assuming. No yellow sign or little hand or so. We'll close the public comment period. And I think that concludes then item number 4. Chris, item number 5, anything, upcoming agenda items you wanted to highlight?
You know, it's primarily been budget focused. We've got another budget and finance committee meeting coming up next week. And on your schedules, you've got 4 specific budget work sessions coming to you in May. If you remember, just double check your calendars because they fall on Mondays and Tuesdays. So a little out of sync is to make sure that that Tuesday is on your schedule. I'm sure the Mondays are, but that's the primary focus of the organization. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on item 5? No? Council discussion. Any items of general council discussion? Any public comment on anything not on our agenda tonight? Please. Sorry to keep you.
That's okay. I came here and I got a civics lesson, so.
Whether you wanted it or not.
Thank you, Mayor Cole and council members. My name is Tim Shea, and I live on just off of the King Avenue, and I'm here I moved to Billings about 17 years ago, and over the years I've seen dramatic increase in traffic, as everyone's seen, and also unbridled. There's no, it seems to me that there's no law enforcement on that street. I'm on it all the time. And in the years, I've only seen 3 traffic stops in 17 years on King Avenue, not down there, but up on the west end. These vehicles are traveling at excess speeds. My son-in-law is a retired highway patrolman, and he stayed there, and he estimates, and so do I, that a lot of those cars, motorcycles, four-wheel drives, whatever, are in excess of 80 miles an hour, and some of them are over 100 miles an hour. And this poses a great threat to the community, not only pedestrians, but there was a wreck about 3 years ago that I live in a condo unit, and the driver was driving a roadster and drove through the fence that contains our condos, ran into my neighbor's garage and into mine, and the passenger subsequently died from injuries from that. And that was only about 60 feet from my doorstep. And I just envision that a lot of things, there's going to be some more fatalities on that street. We just had one, and there is no police presence on that street. I've stopped by the police department, and I've posed questions of nobody's ever gave me a call back or anything like that. And I was wondering what we could do as a city to stop all of this mindless speeding. It's just awful. I guess that's it.
Yeah, and Tim, just so you know, we generally don't engage in a colloquy. It's an opportunity for public comment.
Right.
Certainly, if you see something specific, we can't just assign a police officer to that area all the time. But please contact one of us, the police department, whatever. If you see a specific situation, they will come out on a limited basis at a limited time, limited place. But they have to prioritize.
Well, here's my problem is that you'll see it after 10, 11 o'clock at night, you will hear cars going, motorcycles going, they're going 100 miles an hour. And that's virtually every night. That's just not.
That time. Okay, thanks very much. Councilman Rupsis?
Mayor, I'd just like to ask, which section of King Avenue are you in? Because we can have those speed trailers placed there, Chris, if we could make that request in this section.
It's west of 32nd.
West of 32nd?
Yes.
Between there and Coles or something?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, could we make that request? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Tim. And Kevin, I've got a question for you on this. Do you know whether the cameras, I know the cameras will pick up, or other cities' cameras, will pick up red light running. When somebody enters an intersection after the red, they can be programmed in that way. Do we know what sort of speed sensors, is there technology out there to pick up speeding on these cameras?
Are you talking about the traffic signal lights?
No, just in theory, is there technology that, I know that we don't have it, but.
Yes, there is technology that will do that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So, he left. Oh, shoot. I was going to tell him, call your legislator. Yeah, okay, and I didn't get his address either. I apologize. So, okay, no other public comment. We'll close the public comment period. Before we adjourn, Councilmember Boyette?
What Tuesdays in May, Chris?
Thank you. That wasn't very helpful. May 7th and May 21st. So we got the Monday is the 6th, followed by a Tuesday, the 7th. And then 2 weeks later, Monday, May 20th, Tuesday, May 21st. So those are the 4 budget work session nights for city council. 6/7/2021. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
We can
Very
make
good.
sure a calendar invite goes out.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.